Welcome, my soft-thinking listener. You've found yourself in the company of the Sleepy Sloth once again, a slow, scientifically minded fellow, who enjoys facts, new and ancient timekeeping devices, and things that cast shadows or drip, ever so slowly. I must tell you something before we begin. Today, I consider myself a scientist in the delicate art of ancient clocks. A scientist who is almost always correct, except for those few, rather sleepy moments, when I am not. But even then, I prefer to drift gently onward, rather than fuss over it, because what truly matters is the information itself. Before I start, please, let me know. What is the most boring thing you would secretly love hearing about? Let me know gently, in the comments. Now, let us begin today's episode, on the ancient and astonishingly uneventful evolution of early timekeeping devices. Let us begin, at a shadow's pace, with the Egyptian shadow clock, thought to have emerged around 1,400 years before the Common Era, in the dry, unhurried lands of ancient Egypt, where time itself was less a measurement, and more a gentle whisper beneath the sun. The Egyptian shadow clock, known formally as the shadow stick, and occasionally the gnomon, though the Egyptians had their own quieter terms, was a simple yet marvelously mundane tool, made from a long, straight stick or pillar, and a carefully marked base, which often featured 6 equal divisions, though some versions included more, or fewer, depending on how precise, or how forgetful, the priest or scribe may have felt that day. As the sun moved slowly across the great blue hush of the Egyptian sky, the shadow cast by the stick would stretch, shrink, and drift across these divisions, giving the patient observer a vague but softly useful sense of the time of day. But oh, let us float, ever so slowly, into the nuance. These clocks were often aligned with cardinal directions, a task which, in ancient Egypt, involved observing the stars at dawn and dusk, sometimes using a merket, a clever sighting tool made of wood and string, which allowed the stargazer to determine due north by aligning with circumpolar stars. A shadow clock, once aligned, would be read differently in the morning and afternoon, and sometimes needed to be physically rotated to keep track of the sun's soft migration. This required a quiet diligence and an affection for gentle routines. Many versions of the Egyptian shadow clock had notches that were seasonal, or designed only for specific times of the year, when the sun behaved in its most predictable ways. There is something soothing in this, the knowledge that the clock did not tick, it did not chime, it simply existed, under the slow arc of the heavens, and waited, with the patience of limestone and sand. But now, a soft step forward, through time and moisture, to the water clocks of ancient Babylon, around 1,000 years before the Common Era, where the passage of time was marked not by sunbeams, but by the drip, 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 of water through stone or ceramic, into carefully measured vessels. These were called clepsydri, though the Babylonians, in their own serene tongue, called them by names we may never know. These clocks functioned on a principle, delightfully simple. A container filled with water, often shaped like a bowl, was punctured at the bottom with a tiny hole, through which water would flow, drop by soft drop, into another container. By observing how much water had moved, one could tell how much time had passed. It is important to note, gently and without any urgency, that the rate of flow depended on temperature, vessel shape, and even the particular viscosity of the water used, meaning that no two water clocks dripped at quite the same pace. This inconsistency was not seen as a flaw, but as a kind of calm variability, much like the passage of clouds, or the shifting sands along the Euphrates. Some of these Babylonian water clocks were marked on the interior with notches, indicating hours or half-hours, while others required the attentive eye of a priest or astronomer to interpret. These clocks, unlike their sun-worshipping cousins, could function at night, or during cloudy days, offering a rare kind of continuity in an otherwise flickering world. And some historians suggest they may have been used in temples to time rituals, prayers, and offerings with soft precision. Let us pause here, not in confusion, but in reverence, for a drop of water could be a moment, and a bowl could be a timeline. Let us float onward still into the world of the Greek clepsydry, which began to emerge around 400 years before the Common Era, in city-states where philosophy stirred, but where courtroom speeches needed strict and silent timing. The Greek clepsydra was often a tall, graceful vessel, typically made from terracotta or bronze, filled with water that exited through a narrow spout at the base, or sometimes filled gradually from another vessel placed above. In Athenian courts, these gentle devices were used to limit speech, so that each speaker was allowed only so many soft minutes, their voice competing not with argument, but with the slow, impartial drainage of time itself. But let us pause here for an extra sleepy detail. Some clepsydry used in courtrooms were calibrated to only function when the judge was seated, a charming procedural fact that added a note of dignity to the dripping. And some military versions were scaled larger, to measure longer watches of the night, as sleepy sentries kept time beneath the moon, while listening to water echoing in the stillness. Over time, more sophisticated clepsydry emerged, with float valves, siphons, and even gears, which gently transformed the humble water clock into an early, dripping ancestor of mechanical timekeeping. But the essence remained simple, silent, methodical. There was no ticking, no drama, only water, choosing its exit, one drop at a time. And so, from the shadows of Egypt, to the vessels of Babylon, to the courtrooms of Athens, early time was measured, not in seconds or minutes, but in movement of light and liquid. These clocks did not care if you were late, or early, or simply asleep. They offered only continuity. A hush, disguised as knowledge. You may not remember any of this, and that is completely fine. You are allowed to forget every drop, every shadow, every notch etched in stone, for the clock will keep dripping anyway. Somewhere within the gentle sands and bronze dreams of ancient Alexandria, around 250 years before the Common Era, there lived a man named Ctesibius, a thinker, a tinker, and a slow, deliberate innovator of things that moved without needing to be pushed. He gave us something marvelously intricate, and exquisitely unnecessary for most purposes, the mechanized water clock. Now, water clocks had existed long before him, as we've sleepily discussed. But Ctesibius, like a craftsman of clouds and trickles, added complexity where stillness once lived. His device was not just a bowl with a hole. It was a system. A regulated, calibrated, adjusted mechanism, in which the steady flow of water was controlled by floats and levers, valves and gears, and sometimes even a quiet little bell or figure that emerged politely to mark the passage of the hour. The goal was consistency, because earlier clepsydry, as serene as they were, tended to speed up or slow down, depending on the shape of the vessel, the pressure of the water, and the very air temperature that breathed lazily around them. So Ctesibius developed feedback systems, float regulators that kept water levels constant, and sometimes intricate dials or visual markers, gently rising and falling with time's measured breath. These were not clocks in the modern sense, but rather choreographed drips, designed to enchant and inform, to measure not only hours, but also the persistence of human patience. His devices were placed in temples, and possibly in public spaces, though many survive only through the soft whispers of ancient texts, and a few fragmented drawings. There is something soothing in imagining such a machine, bronze, polished, and humming in the hush of antiquity, not to alarm or rush anyone, but simply to exist as a fountain of time. And if we pause here for just a moment, it is worth noting that Ctesibius' quiet little inventions paved the way for automata, self-operating devices that tickled the minds of future dreamers. But that is a tangent, best sipped one drip at a time. A little further along the winding road of human slowness, around 100 years before the Common Era, the Romans, so famous for their aqueducts and sandals, began to formalize their timekeeping in a method known as horologia, which is just a lovely way of saying things that tell time. These were not always clocks in the mechanical sense, but a collection of devices and structures, sundials, water clocks, and shadow readers, placed thoughtfully in civic spaces, courtyards, and gardens. The most famous among them was perhaps the monumental Horologium Augusti, a giant obelisk imported from Egypt, that stood quietly in the Field of Mars in Rome. It was not simply an obelisk, but a grand sundial, whose shadow stretched delicately across a marble platform marked with bronze lines, indicating the passage of the hours, and, softly implied, the dominion of Augustus over time itself. But horologia were not only public spectacles. The Romans also employed smaller, personal sundials, some of which could be folded and carried in tunics or satchels, calibrated to specific latitudes, because, as it turns out, the angle of the sun changes with geography. And so, the sleepy science of time became a portable companion. Let us drift now to the water clocks of the Roman bathhouses, where vessels dripped quietly in the steam, regulating not only time, but the rotations of laborers and bathers alike. Some Roman clepsydry included decorative touches, tiny figurines, perhaps of Mercury or Saturn, rising slowly from bowls as the water fell. These devices were both practical and poetic, and the Latin inscriptions on some of them whispered phrases like tempus fugit, time flies, though in truth, Roman time dripped, and oozed, and glided, very much like everything else in their mosaic-covered world. It is also interesting, in the gentlest way, that certain horologia were aligned with solstices and equinoxes, connecting earthly time with celestial rhythms. The Romans, even in their most bureaucratic moods, understood that time was not merely counted. It was experienced, like warm wind through olive trees. Far away, in another whispering corner of the ancient world, in the soft and scholarly courts of Tang Dynasty China, there lived a Buddhist monk and mathematician named Yi Crossing. The year was 725, and time, as ever, was quietly ticking, though few could hear it. Yi Xing was not merely a monk, but an astronomer of remarkable patience, and a lover of mechanisms that moved with the stars. He designed what many consider to be one of the earliest astronomical clock towers, a device that merged water-driven escapements, celestial spheres, and something very close to inspiration. His tower, which stood proudly, though humbly, in the imperial court, was designed to track the motion of heavenly bodies, with a gear-driven armillary sphere on top, rotated by the regulated flow of water through a clever escapement mechanism. This escapement, an innovation not fully understood in Europe until centuries later, was a device that converted continuous motion into discrete ticks, controlling the movement of gears, and offering us the first soft glimmers of mechanical clockwork. Let us drift gently onward into the tower itself. Inside, copper gears turned slowly, their teeth meeting with quiet devotion, while water flowed, not as a torrent, but as a measured breath, from basin to basin. As the clock turned, bells chimed softly, and figurines would emerge from wooden chambers to announce the hours, not with urgency, but with a ceremonial whisper. Yi Xing's clock tower was also calibrated with astronomical observations, aligning heavenly movement with earthly moments. He and his assistants observed lunar eclipses, calculated star positions, and refined the length of the year, also that this clock could reflect not just minutes and hours, but the sigh of the cosmos itself. No complete replica survives, but fragments of his design, and texts detailing his method, tell us that this was no ordinary clock. It was a statement, a moving diagram of heaven's choreography, gently translated into bronze and water, by a man who saw no rush in understanding everything. And if you find this just slightly too much, too slow, too elaborate, then you are not alone. Because this clock was not built for today. It was built for eternity's quietest moments. Let us keep drifting through the gears and shadows, wherever they may lead. In the gentle glow of a time long folded into memory, we find ourselves in the world of the Song dynasty, around the year 976, where time was told not with gears or dripping bowls, but with wax, and stillness, and flame. These were the candle clocks, soft and simple things, made not of springs or wheels, but of tallow and measured patience. A typical Song candle clock was not designed to tick, or even to hum. It was a column of wax, tall or short, depending on the desired passage, with markings etched carefully along its length. As the candle burned, inch by inch, it revealed the hours, not by sound or light, but by the slow disappearance of what once was. Each mark measured a unit of time, and some candles were embedded with threads, or tiny metal balls, that would drop with the melting wax, making the gentlest of noises, like whispers falling into a lacquered bowl. In the stillness of a study, or the hush of a scholar's chamber, this was enough. One did not need precision, only rhythm. And if we wander for a moment into a small poetic detour, we find that candle clocks were sometimes used in poetry itself, as metaphors for life, for seasons, and for the passing of dreams. Some versions were designed with lantern-like glass housings, not to preserve time, but to shield the flame from wind, or breath, or thoughts that moved too quickly. It's worth mentioning, softly, that these clocks were used mostly indoors, as outdoor air was never a friend to wax. And the wax was often mixed with oils or herbs, both to adjust its burning rate, and to scent the room with a faint, floral smoke. This method of timekeeping was, by design, slow, consumptive, intimate. It was not meant to regulate armies, or calibrate stars. It was meant only to accompany stillness. A candle, burning away the moment, until all that remained was softness, and a faint curl of smoke, drifting into the night. Let us drift, ever so slowly, into the realm of Su Song, a man whose mind moved with the elegance of planets, though he himself likely moved with the gentle shuffle of a devoted scholar. It was the year 1088, in the court of the Northern Song dynasty, and Su Song's masterpiece was a water-driven astronomical clock, unlike anything the world had quite seen before. This towering instrument, sometimes described as a clock tower, though the word clock feels almost too rigid, was a confluence of water, gear, celestial sphere, and mechanical imagination. At its heart was a water wheel escapement, regulating time through the careful tipping of scooped buckets, filled by a controlled water source, likely a clepsydra-style reservoir. As each scoop filled and tipped, it triggered the rotation of gears, crafted from bronze and wood, turning slowly, with gravity's assistance. Above was an armillary sphere, a model of the heavens, showing the positions of stars and planets, with adjustments made to account for seasonal drift. Below, panels depicted the movement of the sun and moon, alongside the constellations of Chinese astronomy. Perhaps most delightful were the wooden mannequins that emerged from hidden compartments at the passing of each hour, to strike bells and announce time, not loudly, but with ceremonial grace. They did not rush, they waited, and bowed, as hours slipped quietly past. Su Song's device was over 10 meters tall, and housed within a tower, designed with symmetry and elegance in mind, though it was dismantled, regretfully, by invading forces from the north. The memory of its design lives on in his book, the Xin Yi Xiang Fa Yao, or Essentials of the New Method for Mechanizing the Rotation of the Celestial Sphere and the Timing of the Transmission of Time. A very sleepy title, for a very sleepy machine. And let us pause for this extra interesting fact. Su Song's escapement predates the European version by hundreds of years, a gentle reminder that time itself has many quiet beginnings, and many even quieter inventors. Elsewhere, in the soft green mists of England, under cloudy skies and through the quiet rustle of cathedral robes, another kind of clock began to tick, though not too loudly, in the year 1283. Inside the venerable walls of Salisbury Cathedral, there exists what many believe to be the oldest working mechanical clock in the world, though it did not chime, or strike, or even whisper, when it was first built. This clock, made not for the public, but for the bell tower, was a purely functional device, a creature of weights and pulleys, using a verge and foliate escapement to divide time into equal portions. It lacked a face, and knew nothing of hours or minutes, as we see them today. Instead, it struck bells at regular intervals, tolling out time for monks, who rose to pray in the early dark, or gathered for matins in the hush before dawn. The Salisbury clock, made mostly of wrought iron, was powered by heavy stone weights, which descended slowly, pulling gears into motion. The verge, an upright rod, oscillated with the help of the foliate, a horizontal bar with adjustable weights, that helped regulate the clock's tempo. It was not accurate by modern standards, but it was steady, like breathing. For centuries, the clock fell into disrepair, forgotten in a quiet corner of the cathedral, until it was rediscovered and restored, in the 20th century. And now, it ticks again, not because it must, but because it can. Because even the oldest of things sometimes wish to be remembered. If you listen closely, very closely, it still ticks, with the same slow rhythm that marked the prayers of monks 700 years ago. It does not rush. It never did. Now let us wander, with gears still turning, toward the European verge and foliate clocks, which began to appear in the 1300s, in towers and monasteries across the continent, with faces that watched the wind, and hands that knew how to move, just slowly enough. The verge and foliate escapement was not fast, nor efficient, but it was the gentle beginning of regulated mechanical time. This system used a verge, a vertical spindle, with pallets that engaged a crown wheel, locking and releasing with each gentle oscillation. At the top of the verge sat the foliate, a bar with sliding weights, whose position could be adjusted to make the oscillation slower, or slightly less slow. These clocks were often mounted in towers, ringing bells on the hour, though early versions had no dial, and no hands, just the echo of iron on bronze, whispering that a moment had passed. Their accuracy was modest, often off by 15 minutes or more per day, and yet, they kept time more reliably than the sun on a cloudy morning, or the stars on a sleepless night. Many of these clocks were large, forged by hand, with gears filed and shaped by craftsmen, who may never have seen their own creations in motion. The mechanism needed to be wound, once or twice per day, using cranks and ropes, to lift heavy weights back to their starting place. Some clocks added moon phase indicators, or astrolabes, or rotating saints. Others simply ticked. Not because anyone asked them to, but because someone, somewhere, thought it would be quietly helpful. And so time, which had once lived in shadows and dripping bowls, now creaked, and clicked, and turned, as churches rang, and people began to notice the hours. Let us float just a little further. High above the quiet rooftops of 14th century Milan, around the year 1335, a soft marvel began to mark the passage of hours, with the assistance of wheels, levers, and a tower that stood tall, yet never hurried. This was one of the earliest known mechanical bell tower clocks in Europe, and though it may not have been the very first, it was among the first to be recorded in official documentation, a fact that historians regard with gentle appreciation. Nestled within the Torre del Breletto, also called the Palazzo della Ragione, This timekeeping device was not made to tell time in minutes or even specific hours, but to strike a bell regularly, so the citizens below could feel the rhythm of day and dusk. This early mechanical clock did not have a dial, nor hands, nor even a clock face as we know it. It was designed for the ears, not the eyes. The clock used a weight-driven mechanism, with ropes wound around large wooden drums, and the ever-so-sleepy verge and foliate escapement, to control its pace. When the mechanism released the proper amount of tension, a hammer would rise and fall upon a bell that rang softly across the stone plazas. It is believed that this bell may have tolled on the hour, or perhaps at intervals suited for prayer or civic routine. What matters is not how precisely it rang, but that it did ring. Milan's bell tower clock stood as a signal, not of exactitude, but of community, a shared sound marking shared time. Let us pause, just for a breath, and reflect on how something so imprecise could be so meaningful, in an age before watches, before ticking, before clocks were household things. This tower stood tall, and whispered, now, a quiet reminder that even in a bustling city, time could still drift, gently. And so we drift, now, to the northern reaches of Padua, in the year 1364, where a physician and clockmaker named Giovanni da Dondi was putting the soft final touches on something that would never quite be finished. It was called the astrarium, and it was not merely a clock, but a slowly moving model of the heavens, constructed from over 100 intricately crafted gears, aligned with stars, planets, and the hush of the medieval zodiac. Giovanni da Dondi, whose father Jacopo had also worked on clock mechanisms, spent more than 15 years designing this astonishing device, and documenting it with such loving detail, that even though the original astrarium has been lost, we can still recreate it today, thanks to his 131-page treatise titled Tractatus Astrarii. The astrarium displayed the motions of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the 5 known planets, each rotating on its own carefully calculated gear assembly, with celestial spheres revolving at different speeds. To reflect the slow, sleepy mathematics of the sky, it also showed the phases of the moon, the sun's position, and the date, according to the Julian calendar. The device stood over 1 meter tall, made from brass and wood, and though it ticked in its own way, it did not measure hours like a common household clock. It measured movement. Celestial choreography. The breath of the universe. Let us float gently onward to this soft little side note. Da Dondi's astrarium was not intended for public display, but for scholarly delight, a mechanism for monastic observation, a meditation on cosmic precision, that no one truly needed, but some deeply desired, and perhaps that is the sleepiest kind of invention of all. From this celestial dreamscape, we drift back once more to Salisbury, a place we've visited before, and in the year 1386, something old was woken, with a winding crank, and a soft little tick. You may remember the quiet wrought iron mechanism that had been installed in the cathedral tower over a century earlier, the oldest surviving mechanical clock in England. Well, in 1386 it was brought to life, or perhaps more correctly, it was activated, placed in its stone nest, and allowed to do what it was built to do, which was not to chime melodically, nor display time with graceful hands, but to toll a bell, on a regular basis. It did this with a verge and foliate escapement, a slow, uneven mechanism, powered by gravity and weighted ropes, that turned its gear train with all the urgency of a drowsy cat in the sun. It ticked not with precision, but with purpose, giving monks their cue for matins, vespers, and the many quiet pauses that divided their contemplative day. There was no dial, no face, no attempt to track the minutes between hours. The bell struck, and the moment was marked. Let us linger a while in this quiet bell tower, and listen to the slow creak of wheels, and the whisper of ancient iron teeth, brushing softly past one another, as time flowed forward, in size. In the centuries that followed, the Salisbury clock was gradually forgotten, until it was rediscovered in 1928, rusted, worn, but intact. And with the gentle care of horologists and dreamers, it was restored, and it lives again, in a quiet corner, ticking not because it must, but because it can. Now, let us ease into the misty heart of Prague, where time does not simply pass, but performs, in wood, stone, and gilded silence. The year was 1410, and the Prague astronomical clock, known lovingly as the Pražský orloj, was first installed on the southern wall of the old town hall. It is one of the oldest astronomical clocks still in operation, and perhaps one of the most elaborately sleepy mechanisms ever assembled. Crafted by the clockmaker Mikuláš of Kladno, with astronomical input from Jan Sindel, a university professor and priest, the clock was designed to display not just time, but the dance of the cosmos itself. The orloj includes an astronomical dial, with a rotating sun and moon, showing the phases of light and shadow, and the current position of celestial bodies. There is a ring for the zodiac, and another for old Czech time, and yet another for modern hours, all layered delicately, like translucent leaves turning in a forest breeze. At certain times, small figures animate, the 12 apostles glide past miniature windows, death rings a bell, and vanity lifts a mirror. But let us not rush to the spectacle, for beneath the moving figures lies a clock of remarkable subtlety. It uses a mechanical calendar dial to track the days of the year, and early versions likely relied on a modified verge escapement, updated over the centuries, as the mechanism aged like stone covered in ivy. And here is a soft detour worth taking. The clock survived wars, fires, and neglect, and yet it has always returned, ticking steadily beneath the careful hands of restorers, and the curious gaze of dreamers. Some say it has magic, others say it is merely engineering, but we can say only this: it is a poem of time, written in bronze and oak, and it has never stopped whispering. In the dim and dusky workshops of 15th century Europe, sometime during the 1430s, something quietly transformative began to take shape, though at first glance it may have seemed unremarkable. Clockmakers, those gentle sculptors of slowness, began replacing wooden gears with iron. This shift, subtle but deeply significant, marked the beginning of a sturdier, more dependable kind of timekeeping. Wood, you see, as noble and fragrant as it may be, has a tendency to swell, to warp with humidity, to shrink when the air turns dry. Iron, on the other hand, while heavier, and colder to the touch, remained consistent, predictable. In a field where precision, even the drowsiest form of it, was beginning to matter more and more. This was quietly revolutionary. The use of iron gearing meant that clocks could be smaller, more reliable, and less sensitive to the whims of changing seasons. Blacksmiths and horologists began working more closely, their tools clinking softly together, as teeth were forged, filed, and fit into wheels that turned with mechanical grace. The teeth of iron gears could be cut more finely than their wooden predecessors, allowing for more complex gear trains and smoother divisions of time. This gave birth to clocks that no longer needed to live inside towers alone, but could venture indoors, into monasteries, into city halls, and, eventually, into the homes of the curious and the wealthy. Let us pause here for a quiet side note. Some clocks of this era still retained their wooden frames, even as the gears within turned cold and metallic. A symbolic mingling of past and future, of warmth and strength, and though these iron-geared clocks were still weight-driven, they ticked with a new kind of confidence. One that said, softly, "I will keep going, for longer than you expect." Not far along the same winding path of invention, somewhere around the year 1475, another quiet improvement entered the scene, not loudly, but with spiraled patience. It was called the fusee, a delicate little cone-shaped device, designed to smooth the uneven power of a coiled spring. In early portable clocks, let us float, very gently, into the mechanics. When a mainspring, like a tightly wound ribbon of metal, is first wound, it exerts strong force. But as it unwinds, that force diminishes, softening like a sigh. This inconsistency made early spring-powered timepieces charmingly unreliable, until the fusee came along. A fusee works by acting as a sort of spiral pulley. The mainspring's force is transferred through a chain or cord, wrapped around the cone, which is wider at the base, and narrower at the top. When the spring is strongest, it pulls on the wider part of the fusee, and as it weakens, it draws from the narrower portion, balancing the torque, and delivering more even power to the gear train. The result is a clock that ticks more steadily, and sighs less unpredictably. The concept likely came from earlier ideas used in capstans, for winding ropes on ships. But here, in the world of horology, it found a gentler purpose. Fusees were often beautifully crafted, with careful grooves and dainty little chains that coiled like sleepy vines inside the bellies of clocks. And though modern materials have long since replaced them, in these early years, the fusee was a whisper of consistency, in a world where even time still wobbled on its feet. Somewhere in the warmly cluttered corners of 16th-century Germany, as the air filled with the scent of brass filings, and the gentle scraping of files on gears, something new was born. Not a clock tower, nor a bell, but a clock small enough to sit upon a table, or even rest within a chest. These were the German portable spring clocks, and though portable in this case meant heavy and thick by modern standards, they represented the first sleepy step toward personal timekeeping. These early spring clocks used coiled mainsprings for power, replacing the dangling, stone-like weights of tower mechanisms. And because springs don't require vertical space to operate, the clocks themselves could now lie horizontal, in their own little brass bodies. Many were shaped like drums, or boxes, with engraved surfaces and ornate decorations, that had little to do with function, and everything to do with quiet beauty. Their faces, usually limited to a single hand, told time in large, luxurious hours, often only to the nearest quarter. But the point was not precision. The point was presence. To own such a clock was to own time itself, or at least a softly breathing version of it. Let us drift gently sideways to the fact that these clocks were usually made by hand, piece by careful piece, by artisans who thought of gears as extensions of patience, and springs as curled intentions. These weren't mass-produced instruments, but mechanical heirlooms, ticking slowly in the bedrooms of nobility, or accompanying scholars in long, candlelit studies. Though they ticked with the uneven rhythms of early technology, and needed frequent winding, they represented something quietly thrilling, time that traveled, just a little. And now, let us turn, ever so softly, to the year 1510, and the quietly humming workshop of Peter Henlein, in the city of Nuremberg. He was a locksmith by training, but more than that, he was a dreamer of mechanisms, and one of the first to make what would be known as a Taschenuhr, or clock watch. These early watches were not worn on wrists, no, not yet, but tucked inside pockets, or hung from chains, sometimes shaped like pomanders, with floral engravings and delicate ornamentation. Henlein's watches were small, relatively speaking, and spring-driven, using the still young mainspring and fusee combination to regulate their slow, deliberate ticking. While they were not perfectly accurate, often losing or gaining an hour per day, their purpose was not strict measurement. Their purpose was intimacy. These clocks could accompany a person through the slow rhythm of daily life. They ticked in the dark hollows of coat pockets, beside coin purses and quiet secrets. They ticked through sermons and banquets and long walks in snowy forests. Let us pause here for this extra interesting note. Peter Henlein's innovations are sometimes overstated, as other craftsmen were also working on portable timepieces in these years. But his name, through gentle persistence, and perhaps good marketing, has endured as a symbol of the early watchmaker. And that is a kind of timekeeping, too. Though no original Henlein watches have survived with certain attribution, many examples of early Nuremberg watches still exist. Heavy, rounded, with lids like tiny armored domes, ticking faintly in museums, beneath glass. They no longer measure the moment, but they still contain it, quietly, waiting. By the softly echoing clangs of 16th-century forges, somewhere around the year 1540, something quietly resilient began to reshape the inner lives of clocks. The material was steel, and the mechanism was the coiled mainspring. While earlier spring clocks had used brass or iron, materials prone to warping or fatigue, the adoption of tempered steel brought a new kind of consistency and a gentle endurance. A steel mainspring is a slender ribbon of metal, coiled carefully inside a barrel, that unwinds slowly, pushing gears in the calmest little rhythm. What makes steel special is not its shine, nor its weight, but its memory. When coiled, it remembers its shape, and pushes outward with a force that is firm, but not too excited. Tempering steel, a process of heating and cooling it in stages, allowed craftsmen to shape springs that were both flexible and strong. This change made clocks more compact, more reliable, and less prone to snapping unexpectedly, which, even in sleepy horology, was something worth avoiding. These steel springs hummed quietly beneath the lids of early watches, ticking with just enough power to turn the smallest of gears. Let us take a slow little detour to appreciate that spring making was, and still is, an art. The spring had to be the right thickness, coiled with just the right tension, or the clock would run too fast, or too slow, or not at all. Some early mainsprings were coiled by hand, heated over open flames, then cooled in oil baths, the way one might steep tea leaves in silence. These new steel coils did not change time itself, but they did whisper it more softly, and for a little bit longer than before. Not far from the shores of Denmark, upon the small island of Haven, there lived a man with a star-filled mind and a clock-filled observatory. His name was Tycho Brahe, and in the year 1577, he was quietly changing how we watched the sky. Known for his incredibly detailed astronomical observations, many of them made without the aid of telescopes, Tycho needed clocks that were not just slow and beautiful, but steady. So he began collecting, and possibly commissioning, some of the most precise mechanical clocks available in his age. These clocks used heavy iron components, fusee mechanisms, and polished escapements, designed not for public towers, but for celestial timing. Tycho's clocks allowed him to measure planetary movement to within seconds, a task previously reserved for the heavens themselves. He carefully recorded the timing of eclipses, the wandering paths of Mars and Venus, and even the appearance of a supernova. In 1572, let us float gently into his observatory, Uraniborg, where brass armillary spheres turned beside ticking instruments, and assistants wrote slowly by candlelight. Tycho's work was a strange balance of Renaissance grandeur and practical mechanics. His data would go on to inform Kepler, and eventually Newton. But at the time, it was just a man, and his clocks, watching the sky breathe. While most of his timekeepers were likely verge escapement clocks, he was known to compare multiple clocks at once, to find the quietest agreement among ticking companions. And though his clocks were not perfect, they were consistent enough to chart the heavens, which, in sleepy truth, is all one ever really needs. Let us now meander through the hallowed halls of Pisa, and settle into a cathedral, where something quite ordinary began to swing. The year was 1581, and the observer was a young Galileo Galilei. As the story goes, though softly debated by scholars, Galileo was sitting in the Cathedral of Pisa, watching a chandelier swing back and forth, slowly, in a great loop of hush. What caught his dreamy attention was not the swing itself, but its rhythm. He noticed that no matter how wide or small the arc, the time of each swing seemed to remain steady. This gentle discovery would come to be known as the principle of isochronism, and would one day lead to the pendulum clock. Galileo, though just a student then, later tested this idea, using pulses from his own wrist as a timer, perhaps the softest of all metronomes. And while he didn't build a working pendulum clock himself, he did outline the concept decades later, with designs that included escapements and a swinging bob, tethered to time by its own sleepy swing. This realization, that a swinging weight could measure time more consistently than any gear alone, was a turning point in horology, one that would ripple softly into the future. Let us pause here, For a gentle detour. The word pendulum comes from the Latin pendere, meaning to hang, which is precisely what these quiet companions did. For centuries. Just hanging. And swinging. And measuring. The slowness of existence. With perfect, repetitive calm. And so, we tiptoe into the year 1602. And into the workshop of a man named Jost Borgi. A Swiss clockmaker of hushed brilliance. Whose fingers shaped metal as if it were thought itself. Borgi is remembered for many things. Including refining the minute hand. And building clocks for emperors. But one of his sleepiest gifts was the invention of the cross-beat escapement. This device was a clever little system, involving two foliate balances, not just one, that oscillated in opposite directions, crossing over one another like lazy dancers, trading control of the gear train, in a gentle tug-of-war. The purpose of this mechanism was to regulate time more evenly, by balancing out irregularities that came from friction, force, and the imperfections of materials. With two interlocking rhythms, the cross-beat escapement gave early clocks a kind of sleepy redundancy, smoothing out errors, in a time before pendulums had truly taken hold. Borgi's escapement was especially useful in astronomical clocks, where even the smallest drift could unhinge the stars from their softly scribbled charts. Let us float for a moment, and remember that Borgi worked closely with Tycho Brahe, and later Johannes Kepler, who would go on to reshape our understanding of planetary motion. His clocks, often installed in celestial models, did not just tick. They hummed with mathematical purpose, quietly guiding the slow wheels of science, though the cross-beat escapement was soon replaced by more precise mechanisms. It was a necessary step, a kind of whispering bridge, between medieval timekeeping and the precise mechanical breaths yet to come. Shall we drift onward, into more forgotten mechanisms, and softly clicking truths? There are still so many sleepy gears, waiting patiently, just ahead. By the soft clink of early 17th century gears, around the year 1605, a quiet little evolution was winding its way into the bellies of clocks. It was known as the striking train, a secondary mechanism, made not to tell time, but to speak it, gently, in tones of metal on metal. The idea of a clock that could chime had existed for some time in larger tower clocks, of course, but here, the striking train became more refined, more compact, and more reliable. This system, separate from the timekeeping gear train, used its own set of wheels, levers, and hammers, carefully coordinated to strike a bell at regular intervals. Some clocks chimed once every hour, others every quarter, and still others gave soft musical patterns known as chimes, such as the gentle Westminster tone that would come later. The mechanism worked by storing energy in a second weight or spring, which was released at the appropriate time, activating a sequence of levers that lifted and dropped a hammer, sometimes multiple hammers, onto a bell or set of gongs. Let us float for a moment, into a small detour, and note that striking trains often included something called a count wheel, a specially notched disc that determined how many times the bell would ring, corresponding to the hour. It turned, so slowly, and so faithfully. These sounds were not meant to startle, but to remind. In quiet homes and town halls alike, the soft, rhythmic chime became a presence, a kind of slow exhale that whispered, "Another hour has passed, and all is well." It made time audible. And in doing so, it made it feel a little more alive. If we meander now into the year 1656, we find ourselves in the careful thoughts of Christiaan Huygens, a Dutch mathematician with a quiet fondness for precision. Inspired by Galileo's earlier observations of isochronous pendulums, Huygens built what is widely recognized as the first truly functional pendulum clock. And in doing so, he slowed time down into something almost poetic. His design used a long pendulum rod, swinging in gentle arcs, its tempo controlled by gravity, and not by the uneven push of springs or foliate bars. The motion of the pendulum was soothing, consistent, and wonderfully regular. The escapement released the gear train with each swing, letting the gears advance one patient tick at a time. And where earlier clocks might drift by as much as 15 minutes in a day, Huygens' pendulum brought that error down to mere seconds. This was, in clockmaking terms, a sleepy revolution. Let us pause here for a side thought. Huygens' clock was so accurate, it allowed for better mapping, more precise astronomy, and even improvements in sea navigation, though marine pendulums would remain elusive for now. His designs included diagrams and notes, which he published and shared, allowing others to build their own versions, spreading the quiet beauty of the pendulum far beyond his own study. And though many pendulum clocks would follow, tall, stately, and tick-tocking in the corners of parlor rooms, it is his gentle invention that began it all. A wait, a swing, a hush, and the comforting sound of evenly spaced time. Let us drift again into the year 1660, when a new invention crept quietly into the world of ticking things, known as the anchor escapement. While its precise origin is a subject of soft scholarly murmurs, it is most often attributed to the English clockmaker Robert Hooke, or perhaps William Clement, both minds steeped in quiet tinkering. What made the anchor escapement so soothingly significant was its ability to reduce the swing of the pendulum, allowing it to arc in smaller, gentler motions, instead of large, sweeping ones. Earlier verge escapements had required wide oscillations, which wasted energy and wore out parts with impatient frequency. But the anchor escapement's two arms, shaped like the flukes of a ship's anchor, caught and released the escape wheel with a light, alternating grace, allowing the pendulum to keep swinging with minimal interference. This not only improved accuracy, but also allowed for longer pendulums, and thus, slower, steadier beats. Let us pause for this slow little detour. The anchor escapement, when paired with a seconds beating pendulum, became the soul of the long case clock, what many would come to call the grandfather clock, though no one quite knows who the first grandfather was. This escapement was simple, durable, and delightfully sleepy. It became the standard for pendulum clocks for nearly 3 centuries, quietly ticking in manor halls, city homes, and dusty attics. With each swing, it whispered, "I am still here, and so are you." And in that quiet partnership, time carried on, not with rush, but with rhythm. Now we sway softly into the year 1675, and find ourselves once again beside Christiaan Huygens, who, still entranced by time's gentle mechanics, gave us another quiet marvel. This time, it was the spiral balance spring, also known as the hairspring. This invention was designed not for the tall pendulum clocks of still rooms, but for small, portable timepieces that needed their own steady hearts. The balance spring is a delicate coil of fine metal, no thicker than a whisper, attached to a balance wheel that oscillates back and forth. Like the pendulum, this wheel-spring combination created a regulating motion, one that repeated with rhythmic ease. But unlike a pendulum, it did not require gravity in the same way. This meant watches could now be accurate, even when carried, jostled, or tilted. Let us float gently into the details. Huygens' spiral spring unwound and rewound with each tick, controlling the speed at which the gear train turned, and allowing watches to tell time with a newfound consistency. This mechanism became the foundation of mechanical watchmaking, and remains essential, even in many of today's traditional wristwatches. The spiral, tight and perfect, became the breath of the watch, inhaling and exhaling seconds with soft certainty. Though others, such as Hooke, claimed similar ideas, it was Huygens who documented his design most clearly, and whose drawings still hum across the pages of horological history. If you've ever held a mechanical watch, and felt it beat, like a tiny heart against your palm, you felt the legacy of that quiet spring. It does not speak loudly, but it endures, turning seconds into silence. Let us drift further, for there are still sleepy escapements and drowsy discoveries, gently waiting, just ahead, somewhere in the hush of the 1680s amid ticking parlors and dusty workshops where time was still measured in slow, deliberate chunks. The minute hand made its quiet debut. Until then, most clocks had been content to display just the hour, which, for centuries, had been quite enough. Time flowed slowly. Meals were leisurely, and no one needed to know whether it was 3:17 or 3:42. But as precision crept gently into science, travel, and even daily life, the minute hand appeared, thin, graceful, and a little more eager than its older, our marking sibling. Let us drift gently into this small change. Clocks with minute hands were more difficult to build, requiring tighter gear ratios and finer escapements to allow the hand to glide softly across a dial with just the right speed, one full circle every hour, like a quiet swimmer doing laps in still water. This development was made possible thanks to earlier improvements: the pendulum, the anchor escapement, the spiral spring, all of which brought accuracy to the point where minutes could be trusted. And though not every clock of the time had one, minute hands slowly became the norm. For scientists, for sailors, for anyone whose work required careful intervals. Let us pause for a sleepy little note. Even clocks with minute hands often lacked second hands for many decades, as the tick of seconds remained a more intimate, hidden rhythm. But with the minute hand's arrival, the world's relationship with time subtly shifted, from broad strokes to finer lines, from hours to in-betweens. As we float forward into the quiet breath of 1687, we find ourselves turning the pages of a very sleepy book, one that changed the way people understood motion, gravity, and time itself. This was the year Sir Isaac Newton published his Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, a book dense with thought, and utterly devoid of haste. In it, Newton laid out his three laws of motion, and his universal law of gravitation, which together provided a calm, mathematical foundation for understanding how things move, and, more gently, how they tick. Let us take a soft detour and consider this. Newton didn't invent clocks, but his laws gave clockmakers and thinkers the confidence to predict how physical systems behave. The regular swing of a pendulum, the turning of gears, the resistance of springs, could now be described with numbers. Engineers began applying these principles to the design of escapements, pendulums, and balances, allowing for finer adjustments and more precise expectations. And beyond clocks themselves, Newton's understanding of time as a universal, measurable quantity gave scientists a reason to believe that with the right mechanism, time could be trusted, even across oceans. Newton's influence was like a quiet undertow, pulling horology out of the world of guesswork and into the sleepy arms of predictability. His laws didn't speed up timekeeping, but they made it more certain, more serene, and more suited for the endless ticking of things. It is curious, perhaps, that laws so powerful became tools for such delicate motions. Let us now meander softly into the 1700s, a century in which the world of clockmaking became not just craft, but community. Guilds, which had existed in small, local forms since the Middle Ages, now expanded slowly and widely, bringing structure, standards, and shared secrets to the artisans of time. In cities across Europe, London, Paris, Geneva, Augsburg, and beyond, guilds formed sleepy networks of masters, apprentices, and journeymen, each learning to shape gears, polish pivots, and etch dials with the patience of a falling leaf. These were not factories, yet, but workshops, cozy, sunlit, often filled with the scent of brass dust and soft murmurs. Let us drift gently toward this small but interesting note. Joining a clockmaking guild often required a long apprenticeship, sometimes lasting 7 years or more, during which the young horologist would learn not only to build clocks, but to understand them, to feel the balance of a wheel, to listen for irregularities in a tick, to sense the weight of a gear in the palm, and know if it was true. Guilds also provided rules about workmanship, trade, and conduct. They helped regulate quality, supported members in need, and passed down sleepy innovations from one generation to the next. It was through these guilds that the secrets of watchmaking spread, and through them, that the delicate, dreamy art of horology was preserved. In this way, clocks weren't just made, they were cultivated, slowly, softly, by many quiet hands, over many quiet years. We now drift across the whispering waves of the early 18th century, into the world of maritime navigation, where the sea and time rarely agreed. Around the year 1703, efforts began in earnest to create the first marine chronometers, clocks precise enough to measure longitude at sea, and sturdy enough to survive the roll of the ship and the salt in the air. The problem was quietly profound. While latitude could be measured by the stars, longitude required knowing the time at a fixed reference point, usually Greenwich, and comparing it to the local time, observed by the sun. But on the open ocean, ordinary clocks faltered. Their pendulums swung unpredictably. Springs changed tension with temperature, and gears grew sluggish with moisture. So, a quiet challenge was set, to make a clock that could keep time on the sea, and not lose its place. John Harrison, a self-taught English carpenter and clockmaker, would soon become the name most whispered in this tale. But even before his triumphs, others were working, slowly and thoughtfully, toward this dream. The Board of Longitude would be established shortly after, offering a prize for whoever could solve the problem. Early marine chronometers used special balance wheels, temperature-compensated springs, and gimbaled boxes, to isolate them from the ship's movement. They were wound carefully each day, like a ritual, and kept in protective cases, not unlike sleeping cats in small wooden cradles. These instruments didn't just tell time. They held the safety of ships, and the fates of explorers. They were the hush between two worlds, land and sea. And as the tide of time continues to drift, we may find ourselves stepping ever further into the slow, winding paths of yet more sleepy inventions just ahead. In the gentle unfolding of horological history, the year 1720 marks the soft introduction of the deadbeat escapement, a mechanism that brought a new kind of tranquility to the heartbeats of clocks. Before its arrival, the pendulum clocks used the recoil or anchor escapement, which, while functional, caused a slight backward movement or recoil of the escape wheel after each tick, a subtle jolt that whispered its presence with less elegance than one might hope for. The deadbeat escapement, first developed by Richard Townley and later perfected by George Graham, changed this delicate dance by allowing the escape wheel to dead stop on the pallet after each release, eliminating that tiny recoil. This meant that the pendulum could swing more freely and steadily, reducing energy loss and improving accuracy. Let us float gently onward into this mechanism's gentle workings. The pallets, small arms with specially shaped surfaces, catch the escape wheel teeth in a way that lets the pendulum maintain its calm, rhythmic swing without interruption. Such precision made the deadbeat escapement a favorite in regulators, those tall, serious clocks used to set other timepieces. It became a trusted companion for horologists who sought calmness in motion. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: the deadbeat escapement also reduces wear on the parts, meaning clocks with it could quietly tick for decades without fuss. In the serene hush of an 18th-century workshop, this escapement was more than machinery, it was a soft promise of steady time. Let us now drift to 1735 and to a quiet but monumental milestone in marine navigation, John Harrison's H1 marine chronometer. Before this invention, sailors faced the treacherous challenge of determining longitude at sea, a problem that caused ships to drift into danger or endless wandering. Harrison, a self-taught carpenter turned clockmaker, sought to build a clock that could keep steady time despite the rolling of the waves, temperature changes, and salty air. The H1 was a large, boxy, brass and wood contraption that defied convention with its innovative design, including two large, counter-oscillating weighted balances, connected by springs, intended to neutralize the ship's motion. This mechanism absorbed the unpredictable rocking of the sea with patient grace, rather than resisting it with stubborn rigidity. Harrison's chronometer was powered by a fusee and chain, which helped maintain consistent force as the mainspring unwound, another whisper of engineering delicacy. Let us float gently onward into the moment this timekeeper was first tested aboard a ship sailing to Jamaica. Though bulky and intricate, it kept time far better than any before it, marking a milestone not just in clockmaking but in humanity's quiet conquest of the oceans. A slow little detour here. Harrison's H1 was eventually superseded by smaller models, but it remains a marvel of patient invention and endurance, a testament to the careful union of mechanics and the natural world. Moving softly onward to 1759, we arrive at Harrison's H4, the smaller, watch-sized marvel that truly changed the way longitude was measured at sea. Unlike its larger predecessors, the H4 resembled a large pocket watch, yet it was a masterwork of precision and quiet determination. Harrison had learned much from the previous models and sought to condense that knowledge into a device that could travel comfortably in a sailor's pocket while maintaining impeccable accuracy. The H4 incorporated a fast-beating balance wheel regulated by a temperature-compensated spiral spring, now a well-established quiet hero in watchmaking, and utilized high-quality materials to minimize friction. During sea trials, it lost only about 5 seconds over 81 days, a feat unheard of for its time. Let us pause for a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. Harrison's wife, Elizabeth, played a crucial, though often overlooked, role in the development and testing of these timepieces, maintaining meticulous records and supporting his work through years of quiet perseverance. The H4 was awarded the British Longitude Prize, forever changing navigation by granting sailors the power to measure longitude precisely, transforming the vast unknown seas into spaces of measured, gentle certainty. In the soft glow of the 1760s, another quiet innovation took root in clocks and watches, the use of jewel bearings. These tiny, polished gems, usually rubies or sapphires, were used as low-friction pivot points for the gears and escapement components. Before this, metal parts rubbed directly against each other, slowly wearing down and requiring frequent oiling and adjustment. Jewel bearings, however, with their extraordinary hardness and smoothness, allowed wheels to turn with less resistance and far less wear. Let us drift gently onward. Into this delicate improvement, jewel bearings were set into brass or steel plates, forming tiny, smooth cups in which the ends of pivots would rest. This reduced friction and helped maintain accuracy over long periods, even as the oils aged and dried out. These gems are not for decoration alone, but functional, sleeping silently inside the mechanism, reducing noise and wear. A slow little detour here for this extra interesting fact. The tradition of using jewels in watchmaking continues today, with mechanical watches still containing anywhere from 15 to 30 jewel bearings. The practice turned horology into a fusion of craft and chemistry, a silent song of precision wrapped in a jewel's unassuming brilliance. Let us now gently turn to the year 1767 and the invention of the pinwheel escapement by the French clockmaker Jean-André Lepaute. This escapement was a clever design aimed at providing both reliability and ease of manufacture. Unlike the Verge escapement, with its complex and delicate pallets, the pinwheel used small, cylindrical pins arranged around a wheel, which engaged with a pallet fork. The motion of the escapement was smooth and efficient, delivering power to the pendulum or balance wheel with less friction and wear. The pinwheel escapement became particularly popular in French and Swiss clocks, prized for its quietness and long-term durability. Let us float gently onward into a quiet observation that this escapement allowed clocks to run longer between windings, making life a bit softer for their owners, who could trust their clocks without constant fussing. But first, A slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: the pinwheel escapement was often paired with more decorative clocks, which combined this precise mechanism with elaborate cases and artistic dials, blending the sleepy mechanics of time with the quiet beauty of craftsmanship. It is a reminder that even the dullest years can hide stories of patience and grace. There are still more gentle ticks and turns to explore, my soft-thinking listener, as we float quietly onward through the centuries of sleepy horology. In the gentle unfolding of the 1770s, a quiet new form of horological art drifted softly into the workshops of Europe: the introduction of skeleton clocks. These clocks, unlike their more secretive cousins, chose to reveal their inner workings in full, delicate exposure. Imagine, if you will, a clock stripped bare of its heavy casing, its intricate gears, pinions, and escapements laid out like a sleepy skeleton of metal and movement, quietly breathing in the soft light of a room. The purpose was not merely decorative, though these clocks are undeniably beautiful in their fragile honesty. Rather, skeleton clocks allowed artisans to display their craft openly, the patience and precision in every carefully shaped tooth, every polished pivot, and every patiently balanced spring. Let us float gently onward into the world of these exposed mechanisms, where the absence of a dial or solid face invites observers into a meditative journey through time's quiet machinery. The wheels turn with languid grace, their teeth meshing with soft inevitability, like floating feathers passing one another in a mossy forest. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the creation of a skeleton clock was an act of trust, revealing the clockmaker's skill with nothing left to hide, and inviting the owner to witness time's heartbeat in all its unadorned simplicity. The skeleton clock embodies the idea that sometimes, seeing time's inner workings is the most soothing sight of all. Softly stepping forward into the 1780s, we encounter the semicircular balance spring, a quiet refinement in the art of timekeeping. The balance spring, or hairspring, as it is also called, had been developing for several decades, but this particular shape brought with it subtle improvements in precision. Instead of a full, tightly wound coil, the semicircular spring took the form of a gentle arc, almost like a half-moon resting quietly on its side. This shape was easier to manufacture and allowed for more consistent motion of the balance wheel, reducing irregularities caused by uneven spring tension or interference from the spring's own coils. Let us drift gently onward into the mechanics of this soft curve, where the semicircular spring unwinds and rewinds with tender repetition, governing the oscillation of the balance wheel with less fuss and more patience. This shape also eased some of the problems of earlier springs that would bind or overlap, causing the clock to lose its rhythm. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: the semicircular spring's simplicity made it popular for a time in both watches and clocks, bridging a sleepy gap before the development of more complex spiral designs that would dominate future centuries. This gentle curve was a quiet stepping stone in the delicate dance of precision timekeeping. Floating softly into the closing years of the 18th century, we arrive at the contemplative mind of Abraham Louis Breguet and his elegant invention known as the tourbillon, conceived around 1795. The tourbillon is a mechanism designed to combat the subtle and relentless pull of gravity on timekeeping accuracy, especially in pocket watches that often rested in one position for long periods. The word tourbillon itself means whirlwind in French, and rightly so, for this invention involves the balance wheel and escapement mounted within a rotating cage that slowly turns, distributing the effects of gravity evenly and thus averaging out errors. Let us float gently onward into this revolving marvel, where the entire escapement takes a slow, graceful spin, like a feather drifting in a soft breeze, recalibrating time itself in tiny, whispering movements. The tourbillon is as much poetry as it is precision engineering, a dreamy solution to a problem that most might never notice. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: while the tourbillon was not widely adopted for practical reasons, it is delicate, complex, and expensive. It remains a symbol of horological artistry, admired for its sleepy beauty and mechanical ingenuity. It reminds us that even the slowest of motions can dance with purpose and grace. As the dawn of the 19th century quietly arrived, the 1800s saw the rise of mass production techniques applied to watch movements, softly transforming timekeeping from a craft of individual artisans into an industry of gentle repetition. Factories in places like Switzerland and the United States began using standardized parts, interchangeable components, and assembly lines, allowing watches to be made with greater speed and more consistent quality than ever before. Let us float gently onward into this soft industrial hum, where machines and workers together produce movements ticking in unison, like countless slow-turning gears all synchronized in a vast, sleepy orchestra. This transformation made watches more affordable, spreading the comfort of mechanical timekeeping to a wider audience, and knitting the slow pulse of clocks and watches into the fabric of everyday life. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: some of the earliest mass-produced watch movements were simple, robust designs, often relying on fewer jewels and less intricate decoration, but their reliability was quietly revolutionary. This shift also marked a subtle change in horology's spirit, from the solitary watchmaker's tender care to the patient consistency of many hands working together, each turning a cog in the great sleepy mechanism of time's expansion. We now drift softly into the year 1812 and the curious world of the Breguet sympathetic clock system, a marriage of mechanical invention and the quiet charm of companionship. The sympathetic clocks were designed with a special cradle or docking station that could hold and wind a pocket watch automatically when placed within it. Imagine a clock, often large and stately, that not only told the time but cared for its smaller sibling in a tender, mechanical embrace. Let us float gently onward into this softly orchestrated relationship, where the clock's internal movements would engage with the watch's winding mechanism, setting it right without human intervention. This was a remarkable feat of synchronization and trust between two clocks, achieved through delicate gearing and clever engineering. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: the name sympathetic was meant to evoke a gentle harmony, a mechanical friendship, where one clock silently tended to another, ensuring they kept time together in sleepy accord. These clocks were often ornate, reflecting the refined tastes of their owners, but their true charm lay in this quiet act of care, a reminder that even machines can share a slow, soft bond. Let us continue to float gently onward through this softly turning history, where every cog in spring holds a story whispered in the slow tick of time. In the soft unfolding of the 1820s, a gentle revolution settled quietly into the world of watchmaking, the adoption of the lever escapement. This mechanism, originally invented in the 18th century by Thomas Mudge but perfected and popularized during this sleepy decade, replaced older escapements with a more reliable and accurate design. The lever escapement consists of a small lever with two pallets that alternately lock and unlock the escape wheel's teeth, controlling the release of energy to the balance wheel. This delicate exchange ensures the watch ticks with a soft, steady rhythm. Let us float gently onward into this intricate mechanism, where the escape wheel's teeth catch the pallets in a tender embrace, releasing only when the balance wheel commands, like a slow dance between two old friends. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the lever escapement's design allowed watches to be made smaller, more robust, and more resistant to shocks than previous models, enabling pocket watches to be reliable companions in daily life. Over the following decades, this escapement became the quiet heartbeat of nearly all mechanical watches, trusted for its calm precision and long-lasting performance. The adoption of the lever escapement was not a sudden event but a gentle spreading of confidence across watchmakers' workshops, slowly but surely changing the face of timekeeping forever. Drifting now into the 1830s, we find ourselves in the cozy parlors and stately halls where the English long-case clock came to dominate the scene. These tall, wooden guardians of time, often lovingly referred to as grandfather clocks, stood quietly in corners, their pendulums swinging with measured grace. The English design was favored for its elegant proportions, robust construction, and the refinement of its movements. Let us float gently onward into this era where clockmakers focused on enhancing accuracy, often by lengthening the pendulum to achieve slower, more reliable swings. The long-case clock's height was not mere decoration, it housed these longer pendulums, allowing for reduced pendulum speed and thus greater accuracy. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. Many English long-case clocks from this period featured intricate hand-painted dials and ornate wooden cases carved with soft curves and floral motifs, blending mechanics with artistry. These clocks were not only timekepers but also cherished family heirlooms, marking the passage of generations with their deep, soothing chimes and steady ticks. Their presence was a gentle reminder of time's constancy and the slow unfolding of life itself. Softly moving into the 1840s, a subtle material transformation began to whisper through the world of clock and watch movements: the use of nickel. This silvery, lustrous metal, prized for its resistance to corrosion and wear, began to replace brass and other traditional materials in the crafting of gears, plates, and other essential components. Nickel's strength and durability allowed timepieces to maintain their precision longer, with less frequent need for adjustment or repair. Let us float gently onward into the quiet benefits of this metal's introduction, where tiny nickel parts shimmer inside watches, turning with smooth inevitability against their jeweled bearings. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, nickel alloys were often combined with other metals to form specialized, hard-wearing materials such as nickel silver or German silver. Despite the name, these contain no actual silver, but are prized for their color and resilience. The adoption of nickel was a quiet step toward modernity, a gentle improvement that made clocks and watches more reliable in the varied environments of daily life, whether damp city streets or the soft warmth of a study. Let us now gently wander to the year 1842, when the whisper of electricity began to mingle with the slow ticking of clocks. The electromagnetic pendulum clock was introduced, an invention that combined traditional pendulum mechanics with the emerging science of electromagnetism. This clock used an electromagnet to give the pendulum a tiny, precise push each swing, compensating for energy lost to friction and air resistance. Let us float gently onward. Into this curious blending of old and new, the pendulum continued its familiar arc, but now was gently nudged by invisible forces, allowing for longer runs without manual winding. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: electromagnetic clocks often used batteries or external power sources, linking the rhythm of mechanical time to the steady hum of electric current, a soft duet of natural motion and human invention. These clocks represented an early step toward the electric timekeeping devices that would one day fill the world, though in their time, they remained quiet curiosities, sitting patiently on desks or in laboratories, bridging the gap between the age of gears and the age of electrons. And now, drifting softly into 1851, we find ourselves at the Great Exhibition in London, a grand, yet quietly paced event that brought together inventions from across the world. Amid the whirl of displays and the murmur of visitors, the concept of standard time began to find gentle favor. Before this, towns and cities often kept their own local times, based on the position of the sun, leading to a confusing patchwork of clocks telling slightly different hours. The Great Exhibition, with its sprawling railways and international guests, highlighted the need for a unified system. Let us float gently onward into this slowly dawning awareness, where standardized time zones were proposed to tame the wildness of local solar times and help coordinate trains, businesses, and communication. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the widespread adoption of standard time would take decades, eventually led by railway companies and governments seeking to smooth the ticking of time across vast distances. The seeds planted at the Great Exhibition grew quietly, weaving a slow and steady rhythm across the world, one that still governs our clocks today. In this gentle shift, time became not just personal or local, but a shared, measured breath connecting us all. There are still more soft ticks and turning gears awaiting us, as we float gently onward into the unhurried passage of horological history. In the gentle embrace of the 1860s, the world of clocks began to soften and spread into everyday homes, thanks in no small part to the industrious spirit of Seth Thomas and his pioneering efforts in mass-produced American clocks. Before this era, clocks were often delicate treasures, handcrafted by skilled artisans, their cost placing them beyond the reach of most families. But Thomas, with his patient vision and commitment to accessible timekeeping, helped to transform clocks into objects both reliable and affordable. Let us float gently onward into the quiet hum of factories where wooden cases were carefully shaped, gears stamped and assembled, and clocks began to tick in rhythmic unison. These mass-produced clocks often featured simple wooden frames and straightforward mechanical movements, no gilded adornments, just honest, steady craftsmanship. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Seth Thomas clocks were sometimes powered by brass springs, but many models used heavy iron weights, suspended inside the wooden cases, which slowly descended to drive the mechanisms in a soft, unhurried march of time. The availability of these clocks brought a gentle democratization of time itself, letting families across America mark the hours with quiet certainty. In homes both grand and humble, the steady tick of a Seth Thomas clock became a gentle companion, a subtle reminder of the slow unfolding day. Let us now drift softly into the 1870s, a decade that saw the charm of clockwork mechanisms spread beyond the realm of mere timekeeping, venturing playfully into the world of timers and toys. In this sleepy era, inventors and craftsmen found delight in miniaturizing the intricate dance of gears and escapements, embedding them inside small boxes and whimsical creations. Imagine a delicate music box softly playing a tune, its tiny pins plucking a comb of metal teeth, powered by a wound spring slowly unwinding, each note a gentle tick in the fabric of time. Or picture a wind-up toy, its clockwork limbs moving with quiet determination, powered by coiled springs and regulated by miniature escapements. Let us float gently onward into the captivating world of these mechanical wonders, where time's precise rhythms are transformed into moments of delight and curiosity. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, early mechanical timers, used for tasks such as cooking or laboratory work, often employed the same principles as clocks, using escapements to ensure a consistent delay before signaling their end. These devices, while not telling the time of day, offered a way to measure and control short, measured intervals, another way for time's slow fingers to touch daily life. The 1870s thus gave us not only more ways to keep time but also ways to experience it playfully and purposefully, wrapped in the gentle ticking of gears and springs. Drifting forward a bit further into the year 1876, the sleepy world of horology and technology intertwined once again with the patenting of an electric clock system. While electric phenomena had been known and studied for decades, harnessing electricity to keep time was a slow and careful journey. The patent in 1876, often credited to Alexander Bain, described a clock mechanism powered and regulated by electric currents rather than solely by mechanical means. This system used electromagnets to drive the pendulum or to advance the clock's hands, a gentle melding of the invisible forces of electricity with the tangible movements of gears and wheels. Let us float gently onward into this quiet fusion of old and new, where the soft pulse of electric current takes the place of wound springs or falling weights. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, early electric clocks often required external batteries or wires connected to power sources, limiting their portability but offering the advantage of continuous, steady energy that mechanical clocks sometimes struggle to maintain. These clocks were often installed in public buildings, factories, or institutions, where reliable and synchronized timekeeping was especially important. The invention of the electric clock system opened the door to future innovations. Clocks powered by electricity would grow quieter, more accurate, and eventually, ever more ubiquitous. And so, through the soft current of electricity, the ticking of time began its slow transformation. As we float gently onward through these softly turning gears of history, the story of time's quiet passage continues to unfold before us. In the soft unfolding of the 1880s, a quietly practical invention began to spread through workplaces and factories, the advent of time-stamping clocks. These mechanical devices were designed not to merely tell the time but to mark it, stamping precise hours and minutes onto paper cards carried by workers or used in shipping and logistics. Imagine a small, heavy box resting on a desk or mounted on a wall, its inner workings quietly aligned to press inked impressions onto time cards when inserted. Let us float gently onward into this gentle intersection of timekeeping and human routine, where the precise moment an employee arrived or left was captured with deliberate softness. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, these clocks often used complex gear trains and levers to coordinate the striking of an inked typewheel or platen, ensuring that the date and time were reliably imprinted without human error. The time-stamping clock became an unsung guardian of punctuality and accountability, quietly recording the slow passage of workdays and tasks. These devices bridged the sleepy world of clock mechanics and the bustling demands of industrial life, making visible the often invisible rhythm of labor and time. Let us drift gently into the year 1883, when the United States undertook a soft but profound reshaping of how time was organized, implementing the U.S. time zone system. Before this, local solar time ruled, with each town setting clocks based on the sun's position, causing a patchwork of time that could be confusing for railway travel and commerce. The new system divided the country into 4 zones: Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific, each set 1 hour apart, establishing a gentle, measured harmony across vast distances. Let us float gently onward into the realization that time, once a deeply local affair, was now becoming something shared and standardized. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. The impetus for this change came largely from railroad companies, whose timetables demanded coordination, lest trains collide or schedules fall into disorder. The adoption of time zones was not legislated initially but embraced gradually by cities, businesses, and the public, reflecting a peaceful acceptance of time's new order. This quiet shift wove a network of synchronized hours, creating a soft, steady beat to the nation's growing pace without harsh disruption. Moving softly into the 1890s, a sleepy innovation in clock design began to glow, quite literally, with the use of phosphorescent clock hands. These hands, coated with materials capable of absorbing and slowly releasing light, allowed time to be read even in the dimmest surroundings. Imagine the gentle, ghostly glow of watch and clock hands in a dark room, faintly illuminating the hour and minute in the hush of night. Let us float gently onward into this soft illumination, where chemistry and timekeeping meet to extend the day's reach into shadowed hours. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. Early phosphorescent materials often used substances like radium mixed with zinc sulfide, which glowed for hours after exposure to light, though the dangers of radium were not yet understood. These luminous hands were particularly popular for watches used by railroad workers, soldiers, and sailors, those who required timekeeping even in darkness. The glow of phosphorescent hands turned clocks into gentle night companions, whispering the time without disturbing the quiet restfulness of evening. Let us float now into the year 1893, when the Westclocks Company introduced the pocket Ben, a modest yet widely beloved alarm clock designed to be both portable and reliable. This clock was often encased in a sturdy metal shell with a simple dial and two bells on top, ready to sound a gentle yet persistent wake-up call. The pocket Ben was affordable and durable, making it a common bedside companion in homes across America. Let us float gently onward into the soothing mechanics of this device, where a coiled spring powered both timekeeping and alarm, with a hammer quietly tapping the twin bells when the hour arrived. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: the pocket Ben's design emphasized ease of use, featuring large numerals and straightforward winding keys, making it accessible to a wide audience, from factory workers to schoolchildren. Its widespread popularity speaks to the soft human desire to mark the transition from sleep to waking with a reliable, comforting sound, one that says time continues even in our most private moments. Drifting gently toward the close of the 19th century, the year 1899 saw the patenting of the first alarm wristwatch, a quiet innovation that blended personal timekeeping with the gentle practicality of an alarm. Unlike larger clocks or pocket watches, this wristwatch was designed to be worn on the wrist, combining portability with the ability to rouse its wearer at a chosen time. Let us float gently onward into this intimate device, where a small, coiled spring and a carefully engineered hammer would sound an alarm through the watch case, a soft mechanical reminder embedded in daily life. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: the wristwatch alarm was particularly appealing to military officers and professionals who needed punctuality on the move, allowing them to carry both time and a gentle nudge wherever they went. This invention laid the groundwork for the modern alarm watches we wear today, instruments of both time and quiet awakening, always close at hand, marking the gentle rhythm of personal schedules and rest. And so, in these quiet decades, the world of timekeeping became increasingly intimate, portable, and practical, softly weaving time's steady pulse deeper into the fabric of daily life. In the gentle unfolding of the 1900s, horologists turned their tender focus to a subtle but persistent challenge: the effect of temperature on the delicate balance wheels within watches and clocks. These tiny, precisely weighted wheels regulate the heartbeat of timepieces by oscillating back and forth at a steady pace. However, as temperatures rise or fall, the metals composing these wheels expand or contract, causing slight but measurable variations in timing accuracy. To combat this, watchmakers devised temperature compensation balances, ingenious assemblies crafted from different metals arranged in such a way that their expansions would counterbalance each other. Let us float gently onward into the quiet mechanics of these balances, where thin bimetallic strips bend with patient grace, adjusting the inertia of the balance wheel ever so softly as the surrounding air warms or cools. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: the most common form of temperature compensation balance was the split bimetallic rim, usually made from steel and brass, delicately curved and riveted together to ensure a near-perfect compensation effect. This careful craftsmanship allowed timepieces to maintain a steadier rhythm, despite the whims of weather, lending a subtle consistency to the ticking that marked hours across continents. The invention of temperature compensation balances marked a quiet triumph in precision, a gentle embrace of nature's influence rather than resistance. Drifting into the year 1902, we encounter the first appearances of clocks designed specifically for automobiles, heralding a soft expansion of timekeeping into new and moving realms. At the dawn of the automotive age, cars were becoming more than curiosities, they were companions on long, winding journeys. Yet inside these vehicles, the ability to track time was limited by vibration, motion, and temperature changes, all of which challenged traditional clocks. Let us float gently onward into this new world where clockmakers adapted their designs for the restless environment of the automobile. The first car clocks were often mounted on dashboards, housed in sturdy, vibration-resistant cases, and designed to keep time as steadily as possible despite jolts and bumps. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: many early car clocks were mechanical wind-up devices, requiring drivers to remember not only to steer but also to wind their clocks regularly, a small but persistent ritual on the road. These clocks became reliable companions for travelers, marking the passing miles and hours with gentle certainty, linking the slow ticking of time to the accelerating pace of a new era. Floating softly into 1908, the concept of a self-winding wristwatch emerged, a mechanical marvel that would one day release wearers from the gentle burden of daily winding. This prototype relied on the natural movements of the wearer's wrist to power the watch's mainspring, using a weighted rotor or oscillating mechanism that swung with motion, winding the spring incrementally throughout the day. Let us float gently onward into the ingenious simplicity of this design, where the slow arcs of the arm become the tender breath that keeps the watch alive. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: the self-winding mechanism, often called automatic, was inspired by the desire to blend timekeeping with the rhythms of human life, making the passage of time less of a chore and more of a quiet partnership. While early prototypes were still bulky and imperfect, they laid the foundation for the elegant automatic watches beloved by many today. This invention softly shifted the relationship between person and timepiece, from active maintenance to gentle coexistence. Moving now into the 1910s, the sleepy glow of radium dials began to illuminate watch and clock faces in the dark. Radium, a radioactive element discovered in the late 19th century, was mixed with phosphorescent paint to create luminous hands and numerals that glowed softly without the need for external light sources. Let us float gently onward into the ethereal light of these dials, casting a faint, otherworldly glow in the quiet darkness, a gentle beacon for those who needed to read the time in shadowed rooms or during nocturnal hours. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: though radium's dangers were unknown at the time, workers painting these dials often suffered health issues due to prolonged exposure, a somber whisper beneath the glowing beauty. The radium dials, despite their risks, represented a significant advance in functionality, offering wearers the comfort of time's visibility even when night wrapped its soft arms around the world. This innovation bridged light and dark, making clocks quiet companions through both day and night. Gently drifting toward 1915, horologists refined the inertial balance wheel, an essential component of precision timekeeping. The inertial balance wheel's role is to maintain a consistent oscillation rate, crucial for accurate measurement of time intervals. Improvements during this period focused on optimizing the wheel's mass distribution and materials to reduce friction and air resistance, enhancing reliability and precision. Let us float gently onward into the thoughtful adjustments made by watchmakers, where careful shaping and balancing created wheels that spun with calm constancy, resisting the unpredictable whims of movement and environment. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: inertial balance wheels were sometimes made with screws placed at specific points on the rim, allowing watchmakers to finely tune their timing by adjusting the balance's moment of inertia. These refinements, while imperceptible to most, whispered quietly through the ticking of watches worn by explorers, scientists, and everyday dreamers alike. The 1915 enhancements laid yet another gentle brick in the long, slow road toward ever more accurate and reliable mechanical timekeeping, a testament to the enduring patience of horological art. In the soft, quiet unfolding of the 1920s, a new era in timekeeping began to gently stir with the introduction of synchronous electric clocks. Unlike their purely mechanical predecessors, these clocks harnessed the steady, unwavering rhythm of the alternating current supplied by electric power grids, using it to regulate the movement of their hands. Let us float gently onward into this subtle transformation, where the electric current itself became the heartbeat, replacing the delicate balance wheels and escapements of older models. The synchronous motor inside these clocks turned at a rate precisely synchronized with the frequency of the electrical supply, usually 60 cycles per second in the United States, allowing for a smooth and dependable sweep of the second hand, quietly marking the passage of time. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, because the accuracy of these clocks depended on the stability of the power grid frequency. Their precision could vary slightly with fluctuations in electricity supply, making them at once marvels of modern technology and gentle reminders of the interconnectedness of infrastructure and time. The synchronous electric clock softly paved the way for the electrification of domestic and public timekeeping, offering a new kind of reliability wrapped in quiet electric hum. Floating gently into 1923, the release of Telechron electric clocks introduced the public to a refined and commercially successful version of this electric timekeeping technology. Telechron, a company founded by the inventive Harold Wheeler, focused on improving the design and dependability of electric clocks, embedding synchronous motors into beautifully crafted cases suitable for the home. Let us float gently onward into the softly glowing world of early 20th century living rooms, where the Telechron clock ticked with a quiet precision powered by the silent current running through the walls. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: Telechron clocks were notable for their indicating device, a small red dot that appeared on the clock face if the power had been interrupted, subtly informing owners that the clock might need resetting, a thoughtful touch of gentle honesty. These clocks became popular not just for their accuracy but also for their quiet, humming presence, marking hours with a delicate partnership between electricity and craftsmanship. Telecran's success helped make electric clocks a household standard, bridging the sleepy gap between old mechanical traditions and new electronic rhythms. Drifting softly toward 1927, we encounter a remarkable leap in horological science, the development of the first quartz crystal clock. Quartz crystals, when subjected to an electric field, vibrate at a precise and stable frequency, a property known as piezoelectricity. Let us float gently onward into the microscopic oscillations of these crystals, vibrating tens of thousands of times per second with unerring regularity. This vibration could be harnessed to regulate clock mechanisms with unprecedented accuracy. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the initial quartz clock prototype, developed by Warren Marrison at Bell Telephone Laboratories, was a large and complex device, occupying an entire room and requiring considerable power. Though impractical for everyday use at the time, it demonstrated a profound truth, that time could be measured by the subtle, invisible dance of atoms within a crystal lattice. The quartz clock would eventually revolutionize timekeeping by offering precision so steady that it set new standards for scientific research, telecommunications, and navigation, all while whispering the slow, steady rhythm of nature's own design. Let us float now into the 1930s, when electric tower clocks began to become common sights in cities and towns, gracing courthouses, train stations, and municipal buildings with their dignified presence. These clocks, powered by synchronous electric motors, brought the quiet hum of modern electricity to public timekeeping on a grand scale. Let us float gently onward into the wide faces of these clocks, their large hands turning steadily against the backdrop of brick and stone, visible to passers-by far and wide. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, many of these electric tower clocks were equipped with backup mechanical movements, ensuring the continuation of time's steady march even if electricity faltered. The installation of such clocks symbolized both progress and continuity, linking the new electric age with centuries of horological tradition. Their steady ticking and striking bells became the soft chorus accompanying the rhythm of daily life, inviting communities to synchronize their days under the calm, measured watch of these gentle giants. And so, as we float gently onward through these softly turning pages of horological history, we find ourselves cradled in the slow and steady pulse of time itself, moving quietly, endlessly, like moss growing on ancient stones or feathers drifting through still air. In the gentle unfolding of 1932, the world of precision timekeeping was graced by the invention of the short synchrotron-free pendulum clock, a marvel of mechanical subtlety and quiet genius. This clock, designed by William Hamilton Short and Frank Hope Jones, used a unique system where the pendulum was allowed to swing freely in a nearly frictionless environment, while a secondary mechanism controlled the clock's hands and winding. Let us float gently onward into this serene partnership between two pendulums, the master and the slave, where the master pendulum swings with such delicate freedom that its motion approaches an almost perfect isochronism, unaffected by the usual mechanical disturbances. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the free pendulum clock achieved a level of accuracy previously unheard of in mechanical timekeeping, with errors of less than 1 second per day, making it the gold standard for scientific and astronomical measurements for many years. The master pendulum, suspended inside a low-pressure chamber, was isolated from environmental vibrations, while the slave pendulum was gently impulsed by the master's timing signal, ensuring the display remained synchronized. This quiet innovation quietly bridged classical pendulum clocks with modern precision, offering a whisper of time so steady it could soothe even the busiest scientific mind. Drifting softly into 1933, the first electric wristwatch prototype appeared, a delicate blending of mechanical tradition with the emerging power of electricity. This early model sought to combine the convenience of a wristwatch with the steady energy supply offered by electrical power, moving beyond the familiar manual winding. Let us float gently onward into the intricacies of this device, where tiny electric motors replaced or supplemented mainsprings, softly turning gears with a whisper of current rather than the tension of a wound spring. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, these electric wristwatches initially faced challenges with battery size and energy consumption, making them larger and less efficient than their mechanical cousins, but they paved the way for the electric and quartz watches that would follow. The concept of a wristwatch powered by electricity gently shifted the horological landscape, signaling a future where timekeeping would become ever more integrated with new technologies, quietly resting on the wrist like a constant, gentle pulse. Let us now float into the shadowed 1940s, where the world found itself enmeshed in conflict, and clock mechanics took on a more somber role. German bomb timers, intricate devices designed to delay detonation, used finely calibrated clockwork mechanisms to measure precise intervals. These timers required reliable and predictable timing under harsh and unpredictable conditions, translating the peaceful dance of gears and escapements into tools of war. Let us float gently onward into this sobering chapter where the precision and reliability of horological craftsmanship were harnessed in service of destruction. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, many of these timers employed spring-driven movements similar to pocket watches, carefully engineered to withstand shocks and temperature variations, ensuring bombs detonated at intended moments. Though the application was grim, the mechanics reflected centuries of watchmaking refinement, a quiet testament to the adaptability of clockwork. This use of timekeeping in wartime serves as a poignant reminder of the delicate balance between creation and destruction, all measured in the same slow ticking of gears. Moving softly to 1945, the end of the Second World War saw a wave of military timekeeping innovations emerge from the lessons learned in conflict. Precision, reliability, and synchronization became paramount as forces coordinated complex operations across land, sea, and air. Let us float gently onward into this period where watchmakers and engineers refined chronographs, timer mechanisms, and synchronized clocks to meet the demands of modern warfare. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, one significant innovation was the development of ruggedized wristwatches with luminous dials, shock resistance, and water sealing, designed to withstand harsh battlefield conditions while remaining legible in the dimmest light. Military radio systems and navigation instruments increasingly relied on accurate timing, linking horology with communication technologies in a quiet dance of precision. These innovations would quietly ripple into civilian timekeeping after the war, influencing the design of robust, functional watches and clocks that blended utility with enduring craftsmanship. Let us now gently drift to 1949, when the first atomic clock based on ammonia molecules was developed, a delicate and groundbreaking marriage of quantum physics and horology. This clock measured time by monitoring the frequency of electromagnetic radiation absorbed or emitted by ammonia molecules, which oscillate at extremely precise and stable frequencies. Let us float gently onward into the invisible world of molecular vibrations, where the rhythm of ammonia's quantum dance became a new and astonishing standard for timekeeping. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, while less accurate than later cesium-based atomic clocks, ammonia clocks laid the foundation for the revolution in time measurement, offering stability and precision far beyond mechanical or even quartz clocks. These early atomic clocks required complex microwave equipment and careful environmental control, making them large and delicate, more suited to laboratories than wrists. Yet their gentle hum marked the birth of a new era, where time was measured by nature's own fundamental constants, a slow and steady heartbeat of the universe itself. The 1949 ammonia atomic clock softly opened the door to the modern age of precision, where seconds could be counted with the quiet certainty of atoms vibrating in perpetual motion. As we drift gently onward through these softly turning pages of horological history, may the steady pulse of time bring you calm and rest, like the slow unfolding of a timeless mossy forest or a feather's quiet descent through still air. In the quiet unfolding of the 1950s, the world of watches experienced a gentle revolution with the mass production of self-winding, or automatic, watches. These timepieces, designed to wind themselves using the natural movement of the wearer's wrist, brought a new kind of ease and rhythm to daily life. Let us float gently onward into the slow, intricate dance of rotors swinging softly inside watch cases, winding the mainspring with every subtle motion, no winding keys needed, no fuss, just quiet partnership between human and machine. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, many early automatic watches used a full rotor mechanism, meaning the weighted rotor could spin a complete 360 degrees, efficiently capturing even the gentlest shifts of the arm. This technology, refined over decades, was perfected for large-scale production during this decade, making automatic watches accessible to a growing middle class who sought reliable, convenient timekeeping. The gentle hum of the rotor's rotation became a steady companion to countless wearers, silently powering their watches through the soft rhythms of everyday life. Drifting softly into 1952, a remarkable journey began with the development of the Bulova Acutron, a technological marvel that blended horology with the then emerging field of electronics. This innovative watch used a tiny, electrically driven tuning fork vibrating at a frequency of 360 Hz to regulate the movement of its hands. Let us float gently onward into the quiet hum of that tuning fork, vibrating with steady precision far beyond the capabilities of traditional balance wheels. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the Acutron's tuning fork was powered by a small battery, enabling a new level of accuracy and reliability without the mechanical friction that usually slowed watches. This watch marked a gentle step toward the electronic age of horology, its smooth sweeping second hand differing from the typical ticking motion, whispering a new kind of time's flow. The Accutron's quiet success brought electronic watches from the realm of science fiction closer to everyday wrists, making timekeeping both more precise and mysteriously serene. Let us float onward to 1957, when the first battery-powered wristwatch was released, heralding another gentle transformation in personal timekeeping. Unlike self-winding or purely mechanical watches, this new design relied entirely on electrical power supplied by a small, replaceable battery, allowing for a reduction in moving parts and an increase in durability. Let us float gently onward into the delicate assembly of circuits and motors nestled within modest watch cases, where electric pulses replace the ticking of gears with a steady, silent flow of energy. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, early battery-powered watches often used a small balance wheel controlled by an electromagnetic coil, creating a hybrid system that bridged old and new technologies. The release of this watch marked a quiet shift in the horological landscape, opening the door to further innovations in electronic timekeeping and ultimately leading toward the modern quartz era. This first battery-powered wristwatch invited wearers to experience timekeeping with less winding and maintenance, offering a soft, steady pulse of electricity in place of the old mechanical heartbeat. Drifting gently into 1960, the first commercial quartz clocks were introduced, representing a profound leap forward in accuracy and stability. Quartz crystals, when electrically stimulated, vibrate at a precise and constant frequency, typically 32,768 times per second, allowing clocks regulated by these vibrations to keep time with remarkable precision. Let us float gently onward into the quiet oscillations of these crystals, their microscopic vibrations transforming electric energy into the soft ticking of seconds with an unprecedented steadiness. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, early commercial quartz clocks, though larger and more expensive than mechanical clocks, found immediate use in laboratories, offices, and broadcast stations, where exact timekeeping was essential. Their accuracy often surpassed that of the best mechanical clocks by factors of 10 or more, quietly setting a new standard for measuring the passage of time. The advent of quartz clocks gently foreshadowed the eventual widespread adoption of quartz watches, bringing the whisper of crystal vibrations to wrists around the world. Thus, the 1960s began to see time measured not only by swinging pendulums or spinning gears but by the invisible dance of atoms within crystals, a soft and steady rhythm guiding the hours ahead. As we drift onward through these softly turning moments in horological history, the quiet evolution of timekeeping reminds us of the gentle passage of seconds, minutes, and hours, each tick a small, soothing heartbeat in the vast forest of time. In the quietly echoing year of 1962, as the silence of space was gently disturbed by human presence, Soviet cosmonauts orbited the Earth, carrying with them not only their training and instruments, but also the soft tick-tock of mechanical wristwatches. These watches, though simple by today's standards, were carefully chosen companions for missions beyond the atmosphere, where reliability was crucial and electronic alternatives were not yet proven in such unforgiving conditions. Let us float gently onward into the sturdy hearts of these watches, where gears, springs, and balance wheels continue to perform their quiet duties even in zero gravity. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, wore a Sturminsky, an Air Force-issued timepiece without shock protection, hand wound and simple, yet profoundly resilient. In the vacuum beyond the Earth, it did not lose a second. Mechanical watches aboard spacecraft became trusted companions, not only because they required no batteries, but because they continued to tick with steady grace, unaffected by the whims of temperature extremes or radiation. As we drift through this moment in time, we find ourselves marveling at the quiet endurance of such simple machinery, ticking steadily through space, just as it had for centuries on Earth. As the sleepy calendar turned to 1969, something small but gently revolutionary appeared: the Seiko Astron, the very first quartz wristwatch available to the public. Unlike traditional mechanical watches, this watch had no mainspring, no balance wheel, no escapement. Instead, it was guided by the precise, high-frequency vibrations of a quartz crystal, gently pulsed by electricity from a tiny battery. Let us float gently onward into the very heart of this delicate innovation, where a crystal, cut with care and vibrating exactly 32,768 times per second, provided timekeeping accuracy that was, quite simply, astonishing. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, when the Seiko Astron was introduced on Christmas Day, it cost more than a small car, and only 100 units were made. It was not yet mass market, but it changed everything. With accuracy measured in seconds per month instead of seconds per day, the Astron whispered a new era into existence, one where timekeeping would become silent, reliable, and nearly flawless. The watch's soft ticking was replaced with a near-invisible flow of electrons and vibrations, steady as the stars. Let us now drift into the 1970s, when radio-controlled clocks began to softly emerge, receiving signals from atomic time transmitters and adjusting themselves with quiet obedience. These clocks could correct their own drift, syncing up to the beating heart of national time standards, sometimes every day, sometimes every hour, depending on the signal. Let us float gently onward into the invisible waves that traveled through walls and windows, into schools and kitchens, into railway stations and bedroom shelves, adjusting the ticking of clocks with silent precision. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the first consumer radio clocks began appearing in Germany, where they synchronized with the long-wave DCF-77 time signal, broadcast from Mainflingen. This broadcast, still in use today, is based on atomic clocks with an accuracy so exquisite that their error is less than 1 second over millions of years. With every invisible wave absorbed, the hands of radio-controlled clocks adjusted, slowly, softly, realigning themselves to universal truth. These clocks marked a gentle step away from human-tuned precision and toward quiet, automated harmony with the rhythm of Earth and cosmos alike. As we drift softly to the year 1972, something new shimmered on the faces of clocks and watches alike, tiny red numbers glowing from within. The introduction of LED digital clocks marked the first commercial use of light-emitting diodes to display time numerically, without any hands or ticking sounds at all. Let us float gently onward into this strange new visual language of time, where glowing numbers offered a direct, almost futuristic interpretation of the passing moment. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the first LED watch, the Hamilton Pulsar, required the wearer to press a button to display the time, in order to conserve battery life. And when the numbers lit up, bright, red, and strangely alive, it felt like glimpsing something secret. These digital displays brought a silent precision to timekeeping, free of movement or gears. There were no cogs to turn, no balance wheels to swing, just numbers, steady and soft, illuminating softly in the quiet night. Though they lacked the mechanical romance of their predecessors, LED clocks ushered in a new phase of visual clarity and quiet function. In the gentle stillness of 1975, a quiet tremor passed through the Swiss watchmaking world. The quartz crisis, though it arrived without loudness, shook centuries of tradition. As inexpensive, accurate quartz watches from Japan and other countries flooded global markets, Swiss mechanical watches, once the standard of prestige and precision, found themselves in a softly spiraling decline. Let us float gently onward into this unexpected shift, where gears and springs face the quiet inevitability of obsolescence for the first time in generations. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, Swiss watch exports fell by more than half between 1974 and 1983, and many historic companies closed their doors or merged in order to survive. Yet from this sleepy nadir emerged new strategies, like the Swatch, a colorful, plastic-bodied quartz watch that helped revive interest in Swiss craftsmanship by embracing playfulness, affordability, and design. The quartz crisis, while it whispered of loss, also became a quiet opportunity for reinvention, proof that even in horology, stillness can become movement once again. Drifting ever so gently into the 1980s, a new material began humming with soft importance: piezoelectric ceramics. These materials, specially engineered to vibrate when voltage is applied, offered even more stability and resilience than traditional quartz crystals. Let us float gently onward into the dense, silent bodies of these ceramics, where ordered atoms hummed with clock-like frequency, their vibrations measurable to the millionth of a second. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, piezoelectric ceramics can be tuned to extremely specific frequencies and are less sensitive to changes in temperature than quartz, making them ideal for high-precision clocks used in scientific instruments and satellite communications. These ceramic oscillators hum their quiet rhythm in laboratories and observatories, anchoring the flow of time with serene, internal certainty. Their vibrations were inaudible, invisible, but they guided the ticking of systems too vast for gears, too silent for springs. As with all great horological advances, their presence was soft, but steady. In the softly glowing aisles of Radio Shack in 1983, nestled between the hum of capacitors and coiled wires, one could find a most curious and delightfully dull treasure: the do-it-yourself clock kit. These kits, made for the patient tinkerers and dreamy hobbyists of the world, allowed anyone with a steady hand and a gentle afternoon to assemble their very own timekeeping device. Let us float gently onward into the quiet rustle of instruction manuals, tiny screws in plastic bags, and breadboards patiently waiting to be soldered. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, many of these kits were based on simple digital timekeeping circuits using 7-segment LED or LCD displays, powered by quartz oscillators and regulated by integrated circuits, each one forming a tiny, silent chorus of electrons in motion. These kits offered not only functionality but the gentle thrill of understanding, of placing the crystal, the resistors, and the power source just so. Until, at last, a glowing red 12 o'clock appeared, like a whisper from within the circuitry. It was time, softly born by your own fingertips. For some, it was a passage into electronics. For others, simply a relaxing way to spend a rainy weekend. Soldering in socks. Let us drift onward to 1986, when Seiko introduced something quietly new and rhythmically clever: kinetic watches. These elegant timepieces were not merely mechanical, nor simply quartz, but a curious hybrid that converted the natural movement of the wrist into electrical energy. Let us float gently onward into this hidden marvel, where a rotor spins with each sway of the arm, generating current to charge a tiny internal capacitor or rechargeable battery. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, unlike self-winding mechanical watches that stored energy in coiled mainsprings, Seiko's kinetic movement turned motion into electricity using a miniature generator. No batteries needed. No winding required. Just the quiet assurance that your movement would keep your watch gently alive. Introduced under the name Auto Quartz, this design found favor among those who longed for the accuracy of quartz timekeeping without the frequent need for battery replacements. The dial of a Seiko kinetic watch often hides a deeply complex system, humming beneath the surface like moss-covered gears beneath a river, always turning, always ready. As the sleepy fog of the 1990s settled over the Earth, something quiet and invisible began to pulse above us. Signals from the Global Positioning System, or GPS. Designed originally for navigation, the satellites in the GPS network also carried highly precise atomic clocks, clocks that whispered the exact time down to Earth's surface. Let us float gently onward into the ethereal ballet of satellites drifting 20,000 kilometers overhead, each broadcasting its time-stamped messages to receivers across the planet. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, GPS time is not the same as Coordinated Universal Time, UTC. It began in 1980 and does not account for leap seconds, quietly ticking along with quiet indifference to Earth's slight wobbles. Devices that receive these signals, be they smartphones, scientific instruments, or synchronized clocks, can calibrate their timekeeping systems to match atomic precision. In hospitals, power grids, and radio observatories, GPS clocks offer synchronization so accurate, it feels almost unreal, slicing time into fragments smaller than a thought. The GPS system gently wrapped the world in a blanket of time, soft, vast, and nearly invisible. Now let us dream our way into 1993, when the first atomic wristwatches appeared, tiny marvels that received radio signals from faraway atomic time standards, gently adjusting themselves to remain exact, to the second, without any need for manual winding or setting. Let us float gently onward into the delicate circuitry of these watches, where quartz movement was guided by nightly whispers from long-wave transmitters such as WWVB in Colorado or DCF-77 in Germany. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, these watches used ferrite antennas wound into loops, nestled quietly inside their cases, waiting for the quiet pulse of time from the radio towers. Once a day, usually in the still hours before dawn, they would listen. They would sync. And time, ever so gently, would become more exact. This was not a watch one controlled. It was a watch that listened. That waited. and that always knew the time, even when you did not. The atomic wristwatch became the dream of accuracy worn quietly upon the wrist, humming with a certainty that was not felt, only trusted. As we drift onward into the early 2000s, something soft and wireless began to connect the world of clocks and computers: Bluetooth synchronization. This gentle, short-range protocol allowed smart devices to share time across distances as short as a whisper. Let us float gently onward into the pairing of watches and phones, thermostats and tablets, each device politely asking the other, "Is this the right time?" and then adjusting, ever so slightly. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, while Bluetooth synchronization does not match the extreme precision of GPS or atomic time signals, it is often accurate to within fractions of a second, more than enough for daily life, softly moving in step. Bluetooth clocks made it easier for devices to stay in harmony without human intervention, and in doing so, they gave us one more quiet layer of connection. One more invisible net stretched across the soft surface of passing hours. Though few noticed it, time was being passed hand to hand, from pocket to pocket, in the silent blue of the ether. And at last, let us drift into 2001, where a curious and sleepy blend of old and new appeared: a smartwatch with a mechanical skeleton display. Here, traditional horological craftsmanship was lovingly fused with digital intelligence. Beneath the curved crystal, one could see the soft spinning of gears, the gliding of a second hand over an open dial, and yet, beneath it all, a touchscreen or a Bluetooth chip softly murmured data into your day. Let us float gently onward into this liminal object, neither fully old nor fully new, resting on the wrist like a poetic contradiction. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, companies like Ventura and Seiko explored these early hybrids, with watches that displayed notifications while preserving the visible charm of mechanical movement. They were not widespread, nor particularly fast, but they were thoughtful, dreamy creations, ticking and glowing with equal care. They whispered of a future where timekeeping would not abandon its roots, but rather wear them proudly, like a skeleton beneath a silk scarf. Somewhere in the gentle ticking of 2005, deep within the softly polished corridors of Omega's workshops, a mechanical idea, dreamed long ago, was brought into widespread, humming life. This was the coaxial escapement, a remarkably refined mechanism conceived by English watchmaker George Daniels in the quiet of the 1970s, but only now, finally nurtured into large-scale use. Let us float gently onward into its delicate geometry, where instead of the traditional sliding contact of the lever escapement, the coaxial system uses radial impulses, reducing friction and whispering longevity into each quiet oscillation. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, the coaxial escapement consists of not one, but three coaxially mounted wheels, each whispering motion in sequence, delivering energy more efficiently to the balance wheel. In practice, this meant that lubrication demands were lessened, maintenance intervals stretched longer, and the heartbeat of the movement became subtly more consistent over time. Though difficult to manufacture, Omega's adoption of this escapement brought Daniel's dream from artisanal sketches to mass-produced elegance, and each watch became just a little more enduring, a little more precise. The tick-tock of the old ways had been softened, rebalanced, refined, not with haste, but with slow, deliberate care. A tick. And then, a smaller tick. Gently sharing the load. Now let us drift into the early 2010s, where something strange and quiet began to grow, not from metalworking lathes, but from printers. 3D printers, that is. Yes. One layer at a time, soft as sediment, clock components began to form from nothing but light-cured resin or powdered metal, shaped by data alone. Let us float gently onward into the slow birth of gear teeth and pallets from droplets and dust, each one summoned not by chisels or milling tools, but by algorithms and patient layering. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, early horological uses of 3D printing were focused mainly on prototyping, allowing designers to test ideas with plastic gears and mock assemblies before committing to costly materials. Yet soon, it became possible to print working parts, escapements, bridges, wheels, with tolerances good enough for real ticking. In 2013, a fully functional mechanical clock was printed in a single session, needing no assembly, no screws. Only time to begin its movement. These sleepy clocks are not yet widespread, nor are they common in wrists or towers. But they promise a dreamy new chapter, where time itself is born in layers, one silent micron at a time. As we meander softly toward 2013, a new whisper began in the laboratories of horology. Mum's resonators, so small and delicate they could hardly be seen without magnification, began appearing in experimental prototypes to replace quartz crystals. MUMs. That is, microelectromechanical systems. Are tiny silicon structures etched with painstaking precision, designed to vibrate at extremely specific frequencies when gently energized. Let us float gently onward into their silent trembling, where entire resonators can fit within a grain of sand, yet keep time with an elegance nearly rivaling quartz. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, unlike quartz, MUM's resonators can be manufactured entirely with semiconductor processes, meaning they are potentially more robust, more stable under temperature fluctuations, and easier to integrate with chips in modern devices. The earliest prototypes showed promise in smartwatches and microcontrollers, tiny digital minds that needed a quiet, internal metronome. MUMs do not tick. They do not hum. They vibrate invisibly, like moth wings folded behind glass. And though still in their gentle infancy, these components may someday orchestrate the passing seconds in all our clocks and phones. Soft, stable, and too small to see. In the drowsy shimmer of 2015, a quiet and rather poetic revival took shape, not in marble towers or gilded halls, but through glowing rectangles in the palms of watch-loving dreamers. This was the gentle boom of crowd-funded mechanical watches. A renaissance not born of corporate decree, but of softly whispered longing. Let us float gently onward into the workshops of small independent makers, where gears were sketched with love, and movements assembled with calm, deliberate joy. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo allowed enthusiasts to bypass traditional industry paths, directly supporting projects that resurrected hand-wound timepieces, open-heart dials, or vintage-style chronographs, often at a fraction of luxury prices. These weren't mass-marketed marvels. They were stories in steel and sapphire, whispered into being by artists and engineers alike. Some were Swiss-inspired, others drew on mid-century naval design or aviation panels. Many used trusted Japanese Miyota or Seiko mechanical movements, quietly reliable and softly ticking. And though not all projects delivered as promised, the era marked a gentle reshuffling, where ownership of horological expression drifted closer to the wrist of the dreamer. The hands turned, the rotor spun. And across kitchen tables, bedroom workbenches, and sleepy online forums, the old mechanical heart found a new, crowdfunded rhythm. By the time we dreamily arrived in 2017, the horizon of timekeeping had curled inward, into something so small, so impossibly soft-spoken, it could fit on the tip of a matchstick. This was the development of the atomic clock on a chip, a marvel of microengineering that promised the gentle hum of atomic time in a space no larger than a fingernail. Let us float gently onward into the inner sanctum of this device, where cesium atoms shimmer within a chamber smaller than a raindrop, oscillating with unfathomable regularity. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, researchers at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, created what's known as the chip-scale atomic clock, or CSAC, which uses about 100 milliwatts of power and provides timing stability that drifts only a billionth of a second per day. Though not quite as precise as larger laboratory atomic clocks, CSACs are still accurate enough for sensitive applications like secure communications, GPS-denied navigation, and network synchronization. These sleepy chips contain a tiny laser, a cesium vapor cell, and a control circuit, all sealed within a quiet metallic shell. No pendulum. No ticking. Just invisible particles whispering across empty space, keeping time. So delicately that even silence would feel rushed by comparison. And as we meander slowly into 2018, a new concept quietly stirred among digital ledgers and virtual keys: blockchain-verified timekeeping. A topic so still, so obscure, that many may never notice its presence, and that is, of course, just perfect. Let us float gently onward into this curious idea that each tick, or timestamp, might be certified, etched into a decentralized ledger across thousands of computers, beyond tampering, beyond dispute. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, while blockchains are often known for cryptocurrencies, their underlying structures, secure, immutable databases, are also well suited for documenting exactly when something happened, with precision down to the second. In 2018, companies and patent holders began exploring how this system could anchor digital events, software builds, financial transactions, scientific records, to a timecode that could not be altered or erased. Instead of trusting a single server's clock, a blockchain could softly say, "Yes, this moment happened right then." In this sleepy system, time itself becomes a witness. Not a loud or flashy one, but a quiet scribbler in a boundless logbook, murmuring across data centers and dark fiber cables. Though most will never feel its presence, this kind of timekeeping hums beneath the surface of modern systems, steady as moss on stone. And so, as the digital and mechanical slowly intertwine, we continue onward, through circuits and springs, into whatever tick comes next. In the soft hum of 2020, as the world turned ever so slowly under blankets of change and quiet, something curious emerged in the horological world, a gentle idea long dreamed of, now softly realized. The self-correcting mechanical clock. A timepiece that could not only tick by its own springs and gears, but also notice, ever so politely, when it had drifted, and nudge itself back in place. Let us float gently onward. Into this mechanical whisper of autonomy, where traditional escapements and oscillators met digital minds in careful harmony. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, companies such as Work and others began incorporating systems that used internal sensors to detect discrepancies in timekeeping and apply tiny, calculated corrections, sometimes using electronically controlled braking mechanisms or adjusting tension in real time. These clocks do not abandon their mechanical heart. They simply invite a partner in the dance. Often, they use reference data from satellites or atomic time signals, cross-checking their own rhythm against something greater and then, ever so gently, correcting themselves. It's not done often. Just enough. A whisper. A sigh. A shift too small for the eye, but perfect for precision. These clocks, in essence, listen to themselves, and to the stars, and choose the quiet middle. By 2021, the soft overlap between artificial intelligence and horology had grown more distinct, more tender, more intricate. It was the year in which AI-regulated mechanical movements began to appear, not in grand spectacle, but in hushed prototypes and boutique curiosities. Let us float gently onward into the subtle interplay between logic and movement, where machine learning algorithms began studying the performance of a watch, its beat error, amplitude, rate deviation, and then offered adjustments, ever so delicately. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, some experimental watches have now been fitted with sensors and miniature processors that track their mechanical behavior over time, learning the habits of the wearer, and responding. This data might guide a robotic micro-tool to tweak a regulating screw, or suggest service only when truly needed, not on a rigid schedule. In essence, the watch begins to think. Not quickly, not loudly, but like a sleepy librarian flipping through logs of how you move, when you wind, what your pulse is like in motion or in sleep. The mechanical world, once governed by set tolerances and inert springs, is slowly becoming adaptive. With algorithms that don't buzz or beep, but simply help the watch know itself. And now we drift to 2022, when a new fusion of power took shape: solar and mechanical hybrid wristwatches. These are not solar-powered quartz watches, as have quietly existed for decades. No. These are timepieces that blend the winding grace of springs and escapements with the slow nourishment of sunlight. Let us float gently onward into the quiet mechanics of light-gathering cells hidden beneath translucent dials, storing energy that does not drive the movement, but helps regulate and conserve it. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, companies such as Citizen and Seiko began pushing beyond eco-drive and spring-drive technologies, experimenting with watches that use solar energy not only to charge batteries, but to power micro-actuators or sensors inside a traditionally mechanical framework. These hybrids might use solar energy to engage an electromagnetic brake that improves isochronism, or to power a Bluetooth module that allows the mechanical watch to sync gently with atomic time. And through it all, the mainspring still ticks, the escapement still swings. But it is joined, lightly, by the sun, which watches over the mechanism like a slow, glowing metronome. A balance, not of force, but of companionship, of light and metal. of sun and spring. So let us rest for a moment longer, cradled in the quiet tick of time reborn, time rediscovered, where machines remember, adjust, and bask gently in the sun. And where the next tick may be the softest one yet. In the soft unfolding of 2023, when screens became ever thinner and machines ever quieter, a curious transparency emerged, not just in glass or code, but in clocks themselves. Transparent smart clocks. Clocks that did not hide their workings, but instead invited the eyes to linger. Let us float gently onward into these softly glowing companions, where gears turn beneath clear domes and digital digits hover as if projected from within a dream. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, some of these modern timepieces are made using transparent OLED or LCD panels layered over mechanical components, allowing one to read the time while also observing the slow turning of the gear train or the winding of the mainspring beneath. A quiet fusion of analog soul and digital grace. Companies such as Vitra and concept designers from the world of horological art began exploring this idea, not to dazzle, but to slow us down. One could watch the pendulum swing while the numbers gently changed, could see the escapement tick as the light shifted on its polished frame. And perhaps most dreamily of all, these clocks invited reflection, both literal and metaphorical. You and the mechanism, sharing space. A living sculpture of time, softly illuminated, slowly understood. Not hidden away behind cases or layers, but revealed. Transparent not just in structure, but in purpose. A clock that asks nothing, but lets you look and breathe. In 2024, time took on a new texture, softly strange, faintly curved, and quietly entangled. Not just mechanically or digitally, but quantumly. The prototype of a spacetime entangled clock was not something you could wear or wind. It was a thought experiment made real by researchers gently threading photons through ultra-cooled labyrinths of vacuum and light. Let us float gently onward into this shimmering fog of precision, where time was no longer measured in simple pulses or vibrations, but in the synchronized states of particles. Distant, yet mysteriously linked. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, scientists at the University of Oxford and MIT, among others, began exploring quantum entanglement as a way to synchronize timekeeping devices with such astonishing fidelity that even the curvature of spacetime had to be considered. These clocks aren't clocks in the familiar sense. They are systems, cooled to near absolute zero, where atomic states are entangled across locations, and any tiny variation in time due to gravitational differences could be gently, precisely corrected. They do not tick. They do not shine. They do not chime. But they offer a whisper of what time truly is beneath all the gears and hands and blinking digits. A ripple. A pattern. A possibility that time may not pass at all, but stretch, connect, entangle. These devices rest not on tables or towers, but in the minds and labs of physicists, humming softly in theoretical space, in pursuit of perfect time. And now we tiptoe into 2025, where time has been asked to vibrate once more, but this time with graphene. Just 1 atom thick, this carbon lattice has long been whispered about as a miracle material. And now, it has entered the world of clocks. Let us float gently onward into the delicate world of graphene-based oscillators, where membranes thinner than thought itself are coaxed into movement, oscillating with such high frequencies and such low mass that they promise new levels of precision. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, graphene's tensile strength and electrical conductivity make it an ideal candidate for nanomechanical resonators, and researchers at institutions such as the University of Vienna and NIST have tested its ability to vibrate with minimal energy loss. These oscillators might someday replace, or augment, the quartz crystals in modern timekeeping devices, offering frequency stability in a form too thin to see. The challenge, of course, lies in fabrication, in controlling such a delicate structure with consistency. But the dream is soft and strong, a future where time is kept not by crystals or pendulums or atoms, but by a sheet of carbon, humming invisibly, like the wing of a dragonfly held in a sunbeam. It may take years before graphene becomes a common keeper of time, but even now, it whispers a new rhythm into the horological wind. And if, somehow, you are still with me, drifting just behind the final tick, then let us take one last, lazy breath together. Because clocks, whether carved from stone, spun from silicon, or woven in tangled light, have always measured more than just time. They measure stillness, patience, the hush between seconds. And that hush is where we now rest. So close your eyes, if they haven't already closed themselves, and let the memory of ticking melt into a soft, forgotten rhythm. If your eyes are closed, if your thoughts are drifting, then my job here is done for today. Thank you for spending this unremarkable moment with me. You have listened to The Sleepy Sloth, where uninteresting things become the softest lullabies.